Hey everyone, CJ here. Welcome to the Water Margin Summarised Series. Water Margin is one among the 4 great classical Chinese novels, but it is also the most violent, gory, and immoral among all of them. The tone of this novel is much closer to The Sopranos instead of Robin Hood and his merry men. That's why it had been banned many times across multiple Chinese dynasties, and various modern adaptations have whitewashed the story too, adding more justification for the wanton killings and deleting scenes of cannibalism. But for this series, I will preserve all the gory scenes of the original text, though I will spare the details to adhere to YouTube's terms of service. Along the way, I will also explain the historical and cultural context of the plot, so that we can learn more about life in Song Dynasty China. On another note, if you are interested in writing Wuxia stories or other stories set in medieval China, as long as you use this novel as guideline, the setting would look passably convincing. Even though there are some anachronism, since the story was written around the Ming Dynasty, about 300 years after the setting of the novel. By the way, before I start, take a look at these cool shirts and merch for the series. These Chinese characters say, 四海之内皆兄弟. Within the 4 seas, all men are brothers, a slogan commonly used in this novel. Creating this series takes a lot of resources and labor, so our team would really appreciate it if you show us some support by getting these cool merch from the link below. Alternatively, you can also support us on Patreon or make one-off donations by using the Super Thanks button or Ko-fi. Anyway, without any further ado, let's start the series. Water Margin is set during the Song Dynasty, which lasted from the year 960 to 1279. This dynasty rose from the chaotic 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period, which followed the fall of the golden age of Tang Dynasty. Song Dynasty was a period of contradictions. Despite being smaller than other dynasties, it was one of China's most prosperous eras. Culture and commerce flourished at the expense of the military. Yet, it was also mired by constant warfare against their powerful Khitan and Jurchen neighbors. I covered all this information in greater detail in previous videos, so check them out if you need more context. The first chapter of Water Margin starts a few decades before the appearance of the outlaws, in 1058, during the reign of the kind and merciful Emperor Renzong. At the time, the empire suffered from terrible waves of plagues. They tried to alleviate this by reducing prison sentences and temporarily abolishing taxes. But nothing they did seemed to help this crisis. So the good and capable minister Fan Zongyan suggested that they invite a Taoist master with divine power to come to the palace to perform a ritual to appease the heavens. The suggestion was accepted by the emperor, and soon enough, Hongxing was sent to the Dragon Tiger Mountain in Jiangxi, one of the 4 secret mountains of Taoism, in search of the celestial master Zhang. Water Margin loves to name-drop historical figures, especially in the earlier chapters, but the characters are mostly fictional. To help you identify which ones are historical, I will mark their nameplates as you have seen before. After spending a night at the Shangqing temple, fasting and cleansing himself, he was sent by the Taoist acolytes to seek their master up the mountains. Along the way, he encountered a tiger and then a snake, which scared the loving wits out of him. But they were really just tests for his sincerity. As the marshal grumbled at the indignities he suffered, he suddenly saw a lone young boy on this treacherous mountain. The boy said, "This morning, Celestial Master Zhang told me he had predicted that the emperor had sent an envoy to invite him to perform a ritual at the palace. So he had already started his journey to the capital, riding on his crane and cloud." What? So I climbed all the way up here for nothing? By the time the marshal returned to the temple, he was tired and in a foul mood. When he told the Taoist monks what had happened to him, they assured him that the boy was actually their celestial master, who was a prodigy at transformation and many esoteric arts. If he said that he's already on his way, then his mission was as good as accomplished. Whatever. Since his job was done anyway, on the next day, Marshal Hong took the opportunity to tour the temple. Then, he came across a hall that had been sealed away for generations of celestial masters. Hall of the Vanquished Demons. Curious, he ordered the Taoists to open the door to the hall. They tried to dissuade him, telling him that many demons were sealed in it, and it would bring calamity to humanity if they are released. But nah, he is not going to fall for another one of those tricky Taoist scams. So he pulled ranks as Imperial Envoy to command them to open it. Inside the hall, he found a tablet with its lower part half buried in the ground, and the words "for Hong to open" was engraved behind it. Hey, this might be my destiny. He didn't know what was going on, but maybe something good will come out of it, he thought. So he ordered the workers to dig the tablet up amidst the protestation of the Taoists. And would you be surprised if a demonic screech suddenly emerged from the abyss under the tablet and black smoke burst through the temple roof? The bumbling fool who released an ancient curse trope seemed to be universal among many cultures' literary tropes. Anyway, when the smoke reached the middle of the sky, it burst into many rays of golden light, dispersing the spirits of the 36 heavenly stars and 72 earthly stars, 108 demons altogether. This, my friends, is the origin of the dispersing MacGuffin trope used in various East Asian literature. It is also used in Nanto Satomi Hakkenden, a Japanese epic inspired by Water Margin. As discussed in the previous episode, Water Margin, pronounced as Suikoden in Japanese, was very influential in the developments of early modern Japanese literature. In terms of Chinese literature, here we can see a great example of reverse isekai. Gods, demons, or other divine beings reincarnated into human is a common Chinese literature trope. But this doesn't necessarily give them any special powers. The 108 outlaws who will be reincarnated from these demons are relatively normal people. But the balance between good and bad karma from their previous lives dictates the direction of their fate. They will have to try to end this cycle of violence, or they will be doomed to repeat it in another. But let me tell you, Water Margin is not a story about gods and devils. It is really a story about men, and the temptation for violence and destruction despite their attempts to live a just life. Being a 好汉, manly, righteous men. In another Chinese classical novel, Dream of the Red Chamber, which is also known as the Story of the Stone, the heroine Ling Daiyu owes the main character Jia Boyu a debt of tear from their previous lives as flower and magical stone. They don't have special powers, but she is destined to return this debt with her own tears, living a life full of tragedies. This first chapter of Water Margin serves as a 楔子, or a wedge. In Chinese literature, 楔子may not be directly related to the main plot, but it foreshadows the general arc of the story. The country may be ruled by a good emperor and talented ministers, but the foolish action of irresponsible officials may be the inciting point of a butterfly effect that started a thunderstorm far down the line. Anyway, going back to the story, by the time Marshal Hong returned to the palace, the Celestial Master had finished performed his ritual and ended the plague. Since everything seemed to be okay, he didn't lodge any report about the demons he had unleashed. And nothing happened for the next few decades. The story then skipped years ahead to sometime before the 1100s. Here we meet one of the central antagonists of the story, Gao Qiu. He was a ruffian with low morals and a professional toadie who latches onto rich and influential people and trading one master after another to achieve a higher rank. His one and only talent is playing Chinese football. As he hustled his way up the social ladder in the capital of Song Dynasty, Bianliang, also known as Kaifeng, by chance he met the emperor's brother while doing a delivery for his master. As if the stars on heaven aligned for him, the ball the prince was playing with rolled right before his feet. Well, he can't waste this chance, can he? So he showed his football skill to the prince. He performed his Mandarin dog turn kick. This is perhaps the earliest depiction of a special sports move in fiction, and it might be the predecessor of those sports mangas. With that one kick, he delivered the ball right back to the prince and made a great impression. "Hey, do you play ball?" Not long after, the prince's brother, Emperor Zhezong, died. And since the former emperor had no heir, the prince was elevated to be Emperor Huizong. Obviously, Gao Qiu also profited greatly from this, and he was fast-tracked to become a Grand Marshal. Historically, Emperor Huizong was a great painter, poet, and calligrapher, and also a Taoist master. But he just didn't have the knack to be a great ruler, so this terrible decision was quite accurate to his character. As Grand Marshal, Gao Qiu started to flaunt his power and made sure everyone below him know their place. Wang, the martial arts instructor of 800,000 Imperial Army, soon entered his radar. His offense was failing to turn up on the first day Gao Qiu took office and took a few days off. "Sick? I don't believe it! I know your father! He was a street performer and a snake oil salesman. Guards, teach him a lesson!" Luckily for Wang, the guards were on good terms with him and pleaded for the marshal to forgive the instructor. Eventually, Gao Qiu decided to drop the matter. But Wang knew that his future under Gao Qiu will be unbearable, because his father used to be Gao Qiu's martial arts teacher and had trashed this scum years ago. Gao Qiu won't be satisfied until he gets his revenge. So he quietly left the post and brought his sickly mother with him. Like his predecessor Hongxing, Gao Qiu's action became a flap of the butterfly's wing that would spin into the main narrative. Wang is just a side character, but through his travel to the western frontiers, where he won't be recognized by Gao Qiu's goon, we are soon introduced to the first star of destiny. As Wang mother's health deteriorated, they were fortunate enough to be given a place to stay in the manor of a kindly old man in Huaying district. On the next day, as Wang was ready to depart, he chanced upon a young man practicing with his staff in the courtyard. He had 9 blue dragons tattooed all over his body. His name was Zhishen, nicknamed the 9-tattooed dragon, the first star of destiny to make an appearance and ranked 23rd among the 108 stars. "You wield the stick well, but there are gaps in your techniques. You can't beat a real man with that." Obviously, the young man was furious when he heard this. The lord of the manor quickly apologized for his son and told him to behave. But the young man will have none of it, so he challenged the rude guest to a fight, and quickly learned why Wang was made the martial arts instructor of the Imperial Guards. Realizing that he had much more to learn, he kowtowed and begged Wang to be his master. Wang accepted, so he stayed with the Si family for the next 6 months, teaching his new students the mastery of the 18 weapons. 18 weapons means complete set of weaponry. Through the different dynasties, the list of the 18 weapons, which commonly includes spear, axe, sword, bows, and so on, may change, and the list used by the military and civilians may be different. But whenever you heard the literary use of this term, it means that someone had mastered all the weapons. With his disciples' training complete, Master Wang took his leave to continue his journey with his mother westward to Yan'an. Narrative-wise, Wang had accomplished his purpose and we won't see him again. Not long after, Zhishen's father died and the young man became the lord of the manor. Since he wasn't really interested in farming, the manor was poorly managed. As for fighting, however, that's what he is all about. That's why, when the news of a group of bandits having encamped in the nearby Mount Shaohua, he got excited. He organized a militia and eagerly awaited their arrival. And soon enough, one of the bandit chiefs, Chen Da, launched a raid against the village. He had also heard of rumors about some tough guy named Zhishen guarding Huaying village. So he will pay him a visit to size him up. When Chen Da came face to face with Zhishen, he pretended that he was just seeking passage, wanting to go to the other side of the village. "Come on, within the 4 seas, all men are brothers. Do your bro a solid and let me pass, will ya?" Zhishen will have none of it, so inevitably they fought. and after a long struggle, Jing emerged victorious. This bandit happened to be pretty tough himself, and as it turned out, he was one of the stars of destiny himself, Chen Da, the stream-leaping tiger. His two sworn brothers then quickly made their appearance too, Yang Cun, the white flower serpent, and Zhu Wu, the resourceful strategist. Together, they are unofficially known as the knockoff Liu Bei, Guan Yu, and Zhang Fei. You know, 108 is quite a big roster, so you're bound to find some reused characters among them. As sworn brothers, even if they are not born together, they will die together, they said. If Jing is going to send Chen Da to the authorities, then they will share the same fate. Moved by this manly display of manly brotherhood, Jing decided to let them go. Haha, it worked, Zhu Wu said. Begging for mercy was actually his brilliant strategy. Yeah, I know, it's kinda lame. That's why they are part of the 72 Earthly Stars. The Earthly Stars are usually the supporting characters of the story. Despite their crocodile tears, they had to admit that Jing was being very manly, so they ended up becoming true friends and kept in contact by exchanging gifts and letters. Associating with bandits and outlaws, however, was a grave offense, so they had to keep their friendship a secret. Unfortunate for them, one day, when Jing was inviting them to his manor to celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival, his bumbling servants dropped their letter and lied about losing it. So on the night of the festival, the sheriff and his men surrounded the manor ready to arrest everyone. Apparently, the letter had fallen into the wrong hand, and Jing's life was practically ruined. He will forever be associated with the outlaws. So he killed his lying servants and burned his home before clearing a path out of his manor with weapons spinning. He killed the officers in the melee too, so there is no more turning back. Once they have made their escape, the brothers begged him to stay with them. But he politely declined, opting to go west to Yan'an to find his master. Besides, he's got to pass the narrative torch to another main character. Before he reached Yan'an, he made a stop at Weizhou to ask if anybody had seen his master. This is where we meet the next main character of the story, Lu Zhishen, the flowery monk. But he is not quite a monk yet at this point.
Of course I've heard of Instructor Wang. Sadly, he's not here. But I've also heard about you. The nine-tailed dragon or something, yeah? Haha, come on, let's drink!
On their way to the tavern, Jing coincidentally met his earliest martial arts master, Li Zong, the tiger-slaying general, who also happened to be a star of destiny, performing martial arts tricks and peddling suspicious medicines. Look, a lot of these nicknames are exaggerations, okay? It is practically inconceivable that someone like Li Zong could ever do something like killing a tiger.
You know him? Great! The more the merrier! Bring him along! We will all drink together! Ha 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 ha! Come on! Drink! Ha ha ha!
Lu Zhishen is one of those novel characters who speaks with the caps lock on at all time. He is not afraid to say and do whatever was on his mind.
Who the heck is wailing out there? I'm trying to drink here!
The mournful ballad of a singer and her elderly father disturbed Lu Zhishen and his drinking companions. After talking to them for a bit, they learned about the woman's past. She was coerced to be the concubine of a rich and powerful butcher, Zheng, for a sum of money. Then, when his wife found out, she was thrown out of their home and was even forced to pay the money back.
Oh, that's outrageous! How dare he bully good people like you!
Lu Zhishen was incensed by this injustice. Inside the man's rough exterior is a heart of gold. He was the quintessential shonen manga hero type, albeit middle-aged. He is perhaps also the few objectively good people among the 108 stars, while the others are in different shades of moral grey. So he pulled up some money between his drinking companions and himself, and gave it to the father and daughter. He wasn't impressed by Li Zong's miserly offering though. On the next day, after delivering the father and daughter out of town safely by fending off Zheng's goons, Lu Zhishen paid the butcher a visit. He stirred up trouble by ordering difficult cuts of meat. And just to let you know, back then, before plastic shopping bags were invented, they used to wrap meat with lotus leaves.
My dear customer, is this some sort of a joke? Yeah, it is.
Lu Zhishen threw the package at him, and a fight ensued. Whoops! Lu Zhishen didn't expect that the big guy would be killed by just 3 punches. Well, looks like it is time to go AWOL. So Lu Zhishen spent the next half month wandering aimlessly, escaping the pursuit of the authorities. Until one day, he came to the district of Daizhou. Over there, he was surprised to chance upon the father and daughter again. Apparently, she had remarried, and her new rich and influential husband was grateful to Lu Zhishen for his past assistance. So he gave his wife's benefactor a monk certificate and used his influence to find him a place of refuge in a nearby temple on Mount Wutai. During the Song Dynasty, monks need certificates to prove their identity because they are exempt from tax and court fee labor. Some rich people could just buy a certificate and enter any monastery. Lu Zhishen was obviously not a monk material, but since the new husband was a generous patron of the temple, the monks were conflicted by the request. The abbot, however, saw great potential in him. He predicted that one day Lu Zhishen will achieve great enlightenment, and he welcomed him into the monastery.
Hey, do you mind leaving some of my beard on? Wait!
Among their many restrictions, a Buddhist monk is supposed to refrain from drinking alcohol and eating meat. Obviously, these are not the type of rules Lu Zhishen can or will follow. It didn't take long until he started sneaking off to buy them. Among the meat he ate was dog meat, which was relatively common in ancient China and is still eaten in some parts of China today. But dog meat was not the most desirable meat. Pork was the most common type of meat, and mutton was the most expensive and sought-after meat. During the Northern Song period, the imperial kitchen even used mutton exclusively. In many Western cultures, the consumption of dog meat is often seen to be disgusting, since dogs were considered as humans' best friend. But historically, in Song Dynasty, the worst meats you can have were beef and horse meat. The slaughter of cattle and horses were criminalized because these animals support agricultural work as draft animals. And agricultural work had always been highly respected in ancient China. Additionally, agriculture was an important source of national wealth. So, the slaughter of cows and the consumption of beef, which Lu Zhishen and the other outlaws also indulged in, was seen as an act of rebellion against the empire. Today, in China, there are no restrictions against beef consumption. As a quick tangent, interestingly, beef is banned in most Indian states today because cows are considered to be sacred animals in Hinduism. And if you go to Indian McDonald's, you won't find beef burger anywhere. I just think that it is kinda interesting to see how different cultures have different meat consumption taboos and how it could change through time. Anyway, besides breaking temple rules, Lu Zhishen also got into fights with a whole horde of other monks in the temple. After these misadventures, not even the abbot could keep him around anymore, so they eventually transferred him to another temple in the capital. Along his travel, he had a couple of mini-adventures, side quests. In the first one, he thwarted a bandit chief from forcibly marrying a girl by pretending to be the victim. After he was beaten, the bandits called upon his powerful big bro to deal with him. But the big bro turned out to be Li Zong. Knowing that they're obviously outclassed, they listened to whatever Lu Zhishen said and called off the wedding. The younger bandit was called Zhou Tong, the Little Conqueror. He will one day join the band of outlaws too. Next, he came upon a temple held hostage by a pair of villainous Buddhist and Taoist monks. Since he was hungry and outnumbered at the time, Lu Zhishen was beaten back and forced to retreat. Luckily for him, he chanced upon his old friend, Jing, who was just wandering around. So after eating whatever supplies Jing had, the two of them returned to the temple and defeated the villainous pair. Just to remind you that this is a grim dark novel, they discovered that the hostages had committed suicide because they thought that nobody would ever save them. As the two friends were saying their goodbyes, Jing told Lu Zhishen that after failing to find his master and unable to support himself, he decided to join Zhu Wu and the other bandits. Finally, when Lu Zhishen arrived at the new temple in the capital, he was assigned to oversee a vegetable garden, which was occupied by a group of pilfering miscreants. They tried to play a prank on him by pushing him into a cesspit, but Lu Zhishen reacted quickly, and they are the ones who were kicked into the cesspit themselves. After showing them who's the boss, they quickly became his lackeys. On the next day, his new followers pulled whatever little money they had and threw him a feast with plenty of wine. Life here is looking pretty good for Lu Zhishen, and that's why we're going to turn our spotlight to a new character soon.
Ha ha ha! Hey, stop squawking, you annoying crow! Why I order?
The drunk Lu Zhishen casually displayed his strength by uprooting a tree with his bare hands.
You think that's cool? I'll show you what's cool.
Lu Zhishen then started swinging his custom-made polearm and showed that he had excellent martial arts skill too.
Good show!
Amazing skill you have there. The voice interrupted Lu Zhishen, and he turned towards the source. Apparently, the voice belonged to a dashing officer with panther-like features. He was, of course, Panther Head Ling Cong, the polearm instructor of the Imperial Army. The two hit it off really well and immediately became sworn brothers, with Lu Zhishen being the elder brother. This instant rapport and swearing of brotherhood is a pretty common trope in Chinese literature actually. In real life, it usually takes a lot longer. It may even take years of great friendship for people to become sworn siblings, although it has become quite rare in this modern age. Unfortunately, before they could enjoy more of this sworn brotherhood, trouble soon found them. Ling Cong's mate rushed to report that his wife was being harassed by a man in the temple she was worshipping in. When Ling Cong rushed to the scene, he was surprised to discover that the pervert was Gao Yanei, the adopted son of Grand Marshal Gao Qiu. Not wanting to make enemy of the Grand Marshal, he let Gao Jr. go, unharmed. The young man, however, just can't get Ling Cong's beautiful wife out of his mind, so he schemed with Ling Cong's own treacherous old friend, Lu Qian, to isolate her in a secluded place where he could have his ways with her. Fortunately, that plan was foiled again by Ling Cong's trusty mate, who alerted him in the nick of time. Depressed by his repeated failures and pining, Gao Jr. became weak and sickly. In order to lift his spirit, his lackeys cooked up another scheme, and this time, Grand Marshal Gao Qiu himself was part of the plan. Oh wow, what a bargain! On one lucky day, Ling Cong bought an especially rare and precious sword that was sold at a bargain price, and as soon as he got home, he received news that the Grand Marshal Gao Qiu wanted to have a look at this precious sword he had just bought. That is odd. Why is he being so nosy? Ling Cong thought. When he went to Gao Qiu's place of residence, he was then led deep into the inner halls of the building by an attendant he had never seen before. Then, he suddenly realized that he had been brought into a restricted military council chamber while carrying his weapon.
You! What are you doing in this restricted hall? Are you trying to assassinate me? Guards! Seize him!
Ling Cong fell squarely into this trap. Obviously, attempting to assassinate a high-ranking official is a serious crime. It could be considered as one of the 10 abominations, 10 of the worst crimes according to traditional Chinese law. Here is a quick crash course on Imperial Chinese laws. When found guilty, Ling Cong would be punished according to the 5 punishments. During this period, punishments 3, 4, 5 were often converted to military servitude. If he was the emperor's relative or other exceptional individual, he would get reduced sentences according to the 8 deliberations rule. But unfortunately, the rule does not apply to cases involving the 10 abominations. Thus, Ling Cong was beaten 20 times with heavy cane and exiled to an army post in Changzhou. Additionally, he was given criminal tattoo on the face. In Song Dynasty, there were up to 200 crimes that involved tattooing and banishment to join the army. In Song Dynasty, these tattoos were euphemistically called Golden Seal. Korea, Vietnam, and Japan also had similar laws, since their laws were also inspired by the Tang Dynasty Code. That is also why the two are traditionally connected to criminality in East Asia. Not knowing when he would be able to return, Ling Chong granted his wife a divorce by signing the divorce papers, so that she could find a better husband. But his troubles weren't over yet, because the two guards who were tasked to transfer him were also secretly ordered to kill him.
Oh, no you don't!
Luckily, Lu Zhishen saved him in the nick of time. Hoping that one day he would be allowed to return to society, Ling Chong pleaded for their lives. Reluctantly, Lu Zhishen spared them. But he had to follow and watch them, and he did it for days until they were close to their destination before leaving. Now, just before he reached his destination, Ling Chong heard about the philanthropist who receives criminals and those in need, so he decided to pay him a visit. Obviously, the guards are in no position to object since that episode with Lu Zhishen. So he went to the philanthropist's home, and he met Jing, another star of destiny. He admired Ling Chong's martial arts skill as the former polearm instructor of the Imperial Army. But there was coincidentally another martial arts instructor there named Hong who wasn't too impressed by him. So predictably, the two had to spar. Now, this section in Chapter 9 is a masterclass in Wuxia writing. Here we also see many elements of the Wuxia fight that we still see today. Number 1. Stance names. Ling Chong put up the Shandong defense. Hong, on the other hand, used Hebei pincers to attack and pressure his opponent. Not wanting to embarrass Hong, who was Jing's guest, and having the disadvantage of a kang around his neck, Ling Chong conceded the fight after a short bout. 2. Rising tension and stakes. Wanting to see more of this fight, Jing bribed the guards to unlock the kang, quite literally releasing Ling Chong's power limiter. He also promised a hefty reward of silver to the winner, signaling that he wanted Ling Chong to win after all. 3. Name moves. As they resumed the fight, Hong used putting heaven to the torch, and Ling Chong countered with combing grass for snakes. Moving back a bit, Ling Chong exposed a weakness in his opponent's stance, and with a cracking sweep, he smashed Instructor Hong in the shin and promptly ended the fight. This is why this novel from half a millennium ago is considered to be the granddaddy of wuxia literature. But it is really a multi-genre novel, because not all fights were described with so much details. But in this case, it is relevant to exhibit Ling Chong's character. After a few days of celebration, Ling Chong reported to Changzhou prison barracks. He was treated well and assigned a cushy job with a lot of freedoms, because he's got Jing's letter of recommendation and also enough money to bribe the wardens. After a while, he heard rumors about Lu Qian and Gao Jr.'s men being seen in the vicinity. This news was followed by his sudden transfer to a rundown granary depot. The roof of the shack collapsed under the weight of snow on his first day, so he had to spend the night in an old temple, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Later, in the middle of the night, he saw that fire had broken out in the granary, and there, standing before the flames, were the warden, Gao Jr.'s lackey, An, and his treacherous former friend, Lu Qian. They were there to finish the job they had started. Even if Ling Chong escaped the fire, he would be executed for the destruction of the granary, they laughed. This was it. The straw that broke the camel's back. Now he can't return to good society anymore. So he turned full outlaw. You scum! He rushed in to skewer the warden, followed by An, and for his treacherous old friend, he had reserved something special for him. Ling Chong pulled out a dagger, cut open the villain, and with his bare hands, he ripped out the man's heart and liver. Yep, this novel is that gory. Since he can't go back to the barracks anymore, Ling Chong wandered off into the snowy night. Eventually, he found shelter in an old farmer's house, and belligerently, he drove away the occupants for refusing to sell him wine. On the next morning, he discovered himself all tied up when he came to his senses. Apparently, they had discovered him lying on the snow dead drunk yesterday. Yeah, Ling Chong was still pretty new at being this big bad outlaw thing. After he was smacked around for a bit, Jing arrived to the scene. Apparently, the peasants were his men. After hearing what happened to Ling Chong, he gave him a letter of recommendation and directed him to Mount Liang, where he could find refuge. Not long after, Ling Cong reached the marshes of Mount Liang and met Zhu Gui, the dry land alligator, who ferried him across to see their leader. When Ling Cong was brought into the assembly hall, he met the leader of Mount Liang, Wang Lun, and his captains Song Wan and Du Qian. At this point of the story, Mount Liang was just a two-bit bandit outfit run by the failed scholar Wang Lun. He was quite nervous when Ling Cong proposed to join them, since the former polearm trainer of the Imperial Army was way overqualified to be his underling. So to get rid of him, he demanded that Ling Cong had to pass a difficult initiation rite. He had to prove his loyalty by presenting a severed head to him. Since they are in the middle of nowhere, this means that he had to kill an innocent passerby. Ling Cong agreed, and he was given 3 days. Wang Lun was a petty man, hardly fit to be a leader. That's why he didn't last long. Soon enough, he will be replaced in a coup by another leader, Cao Ge. And after him, Song Jiang will assume the position of the final and true leader of Mount Liang. Nur Ha-Zi, the patriarch of the Manchu people who will eventually establish the Qing Dynasty, pretty much learned all about warfare by reading Romance of the Three Kingdoms and Water Margin. While you can learn about war and strategy in Three Kingdoms, in Water Margin you can learn all about Machiavellian backstabbing, inducements, corruption, and all other kinds of dirty dealing. Now, down at the foot of the mountain, Ling Cong wasn't having much luck. On his first day, he saw no one. And on the second day, there were just too many people. And on the third day, the lone baggage carrier he saw ran so fast, he wasn't able to catch him. But wait a minute, the baggage carrier dropped quite a lot of precious goods. Maybe that can substitute for the severed head?
Hey, what's the meaning of this?
Suddenly, a grim man with blue birthmark on his face called out to Ling Cong. That man was Yang Zi, the blue-faced beast. The baggage that was dropped belonged to him, and he wanted it back. Naturally, the two ended up fighting, and the two warriors were evenly matched. Luckily, Wang Lun and the others arrived to the scene to stop the fight before anyone could get hurt. It was all a misunderstanding. They diffused the situation after a bit of talking. Wang Lun had heard about Yang Zi before. He was a famous figure in Jianghu, and he tried to recruit him to balance against Ling Cong's influence. But Yang Zi politely declined because he was planning to go to the capital to get his old job back as Imperial Guard. Now, this is where we turn the spotlight to Yang Zi, as we momentarily leave Ling Cong, who was begrudgingly employed by an unappreciative boss. Yang Zi was a grim and tough, no-nonsense warrior, with the terrible luck of always losing his baggage. He got into trouble with the law last time when the baggage he was protecting was swept away by a thunderstorm. But since there was a general amnesty, where the emperor would commute everyone's sentence, he decided to use this opportunity to be re-employed. When you commit a crime back then, the strategy of various outlaws was to run and hide somewhere until a general amnesty was announced. Amnesties can be made for various reasons, such as disaster relief or other big events, but it is mostly done at the discretion of the emperor. Depending on the emperor's reign, it may happen regularly or just a handful of times. Unfortunately, Yang Zi was kicked out by Gao Qiu, who wasn't too impressed by his resume. Down on his luck, he had no choice but to sell his heirloom sword in the street. To make things worse, an infamous local ruffian picked trouble with him. After lying about wanting to buy the sword, he tried to wrestle the sword away. So Yang Zi cold-bloodedly cut him down and followed with a couple of extra thrusts to make sure that the job is done. Well, obviously, he had to be taken to the magistrate for this. But since everyone hated the ruffian anyway, the people pleaded mercy for him, and he was given the lighter sentence of military servitude. He was exiled to Daming district. Over there, he impressed the governor with his martial prowess by fighting his best general, So Cao, the impatient vanguard, to a standstill. Yang Zi is the perfect man to guard a delivery tribute to his father-in-law, Cai Jing, the government thought. Cai Jing was a historical person one of the 6 scoundrels who was blamed for the downfall of Northern Song Dynasty. In Water Margin, he became one of the primary antagonists, and to match his treacherous image, this tribute was the fruit of the governor's corruption. Meanwhile, in the nearby district of Yunceng, law enforcement officers Zhu Tong, Lord of the Beautiful Beard, and Lei Heng, the Winged Tiger, had been put on high alert due to recent bandit activities from Mount Liang. Soon enough, Lei Heng picked up a suspicious figure in an abandoned temple. That man was Liao, the red-haired devil. This wild-looking man was not just your common vagrant. He's actually got a secret with him. Luckily for Liao, Lei Heng and the officers made a stop at the local village chief, Cao Gai's house. Just the man Liao was looking for. With a proverbial nod and a wink, Cao Gai pretended that Liao was his long-lost nephew and told the officers that it was all a misunderstanding. Since Cao Gai was an upstanding citizen known for his generosity and love of justice, they believed his story. To further smoothen things, he also greased their palms with some silvers, of course. Now that the copper's gone, they got right into business. Apparently, Liao had picked up some juicy info about a cartload of ill-gotten treasures being transported out of Daming. If they were to intercept it, they would become filthy rich. Oh, Cao Gai liked the idea. But they can't just saunter in and tell them to stick them up. Especially when they've got somebody like Yang Zi guarding the transport. This needs to be approached carefully. They need to plan a heist. First, they get Cao Gai's old friend, Wu Yong, the professor, to be their strategist. Cao Gai, you son of a gun! I'm in! And the 3 Ruan brothers. Cao Gai, you son of a gun, we're in! And finally, the Taoist priest Gong Sun Seng. Cao Gai, you son of a gun, I'm in! With the addition of Bai Seng, the Daylight Rat playing as minor patsy, the Cao Gai 7 launched their heist. Meanwhile, on the other side, while transferring the treasure, Yang Zi had been behaving very professionally. He kept an eye open at anything suspicious, even at some innocuous date sellers resting before them. Moments later, a wine seller approached them and rested nearby too. Looking at the 2 refreshing barrels of wine, Yang Zi's crew became quite thirsty and pestered him to allow them to buy it. Request denied. Yang Zi was wary that the wine might be drugged. After the date seller bought 1 barrel and finished it, Yang Zi was still unconvinced that it was safe. Then, he saw the date sellers pranking the wine seller by stealing ladles of wine from the other barrel and drank from it too. It seems that the other barrel is safe too. After a bit more pestering by the crew, Yang Zi relented and allowed them to buy the wine, as soon as the wine seller took back the ladle of stolen wine. Yang Zi was reluctant to drink at first, but he eventually had a bit himself. And he saw his crew falling unconscious one by one, until he himself blacked out too. By the time he woke up, the cargo he was guarding was gone. His boss would have his head for this. Obviously, this was a successful heist by the Cao Gai 7. The date sellers were actually them in disguise, and Bai Seng was the wine seller. So where did the drug come from? Why were they alright when they drank the wine? Well, actually, the wine were all safe in the beginning, until the drug was mixed in later with the second ladle, when they pretended to steal from the second bucket and drink from it. Yang Zi felt so stupid, he would have killed himself. But in the end, he decided against it, and became an outlaw once again. At first, he wanted to go to Mount Liang, but after he met Cao Zeng, Ling Cong's former disciple, and Lu Zhishen, who was on the run from Gao Qiu's goons for saving Ling Cong, they decided to go to Twin Dragon's Peak instead. They defeated the bandit leader there and took over the organization, with Lu Zhishen becoming the new leader. Their story will be continued in later chapters. Back in the capital, Cai Jing, the intended recipient of the robbed cargo, was angered by this audacious crime. So he sent his best investigators to sniff out the culprit. Bai Seng was the first one to be caught, and after he was tortured, he started naming names. Cao Gai's days are numbered. Officers then gathered at Yunceng to arrest him. But as they were doing the paperwork, they are experiencing an unexpected delay. Unbeknownst to them, the registrar was actually a friend of Cao Kai, his sworn brother even. He informed Cao Kai of the imminent arrest, so he was able to escape in the nick of time. With some additional help from Zhu Tong and Lei Heng, who looked the other way because they are also friends of Cao Kai. Cao Kai then regrouped with his 6 other accomplices and went to join the bandits at Mount Liang. Wang Lun welcomed them with big open arms. But in reality, he was quite reluctant to accept them because they've brought too much heat with them. Wu Yong saw through this facade. At the same time, he also saw Ling Cong's blatant dissatisfaction with Wang Lun as leader. Capitalizing on this, they pulled Ling Cong to their side and launched a coup to kill Wang Lun and took over the base for themselves. As for his lieutenants, Song Wan and Du Qian just quietly followed their new master. Yep, for so-called righteous bandits, there were actually quite a lot of backstabbing and internal conflict. Now, with Mount Liang unified under Cao Kai's control, they repelled the government forces and their fame started to grow. Cao Kai was not an ungrateful man. He knew that all this was made possible by his friends. So, he ordered Liu Tang to bring some money with him to bribe the authorities to get Bai Sheng out of prison, and also to reward his loyal sworn brother who helped him escape, Song Jiang, the future leader of the 108 Mount Liang bandits. Song Jiang was a total bro, righteous, generous, and possessing godly amount of charisma. And he had helped a lot of outlaws and people of Jianghu in time of needs, just like a rain during drought. That's why his nickname was Timely Rain. Among the 108 outlaws, he was the only one who was based on a historical person. But other than some little details, we don't know what the real Song Jiang was like. The fictional Song Jiang, however, followed the usual Confucian hero mold. Virtuous, strongly charismatic, and just like the fictional Liu Bei, quite hypocritical too. As a philanthropist, he helped not just outlaws, but also other people who are in need. At one time, he helped a poor old woman to buy a coffin for her deceased husband. He was then offered to take her daughter, Po Si's hand in marriage. Song Jiang really didn't have much time for women. But after much persuasion, he relented and took her in. In Song Dynasty, common man can have as many concubines as he can afford, but only one legal wife. Concubines are lower-ranked wives, but their level is really much closer to the maids rather than a secondary wife. However, their children can become the father's heir too. To be a wife, the marriage needs to go through proper ceremony. The wife's side also need to provide some form of dowry, and this is usually arranged by the parents' families, usually from similar social status. Marrying concubine, however, is much more casual. It is usually done through matchmakers, and ceremonies are not needed. They would also need to perform menial tasks, like a maid, besides being the husband's sexual partner. That is why some wives may even suggest for the husband to get a concubine. They are not too fussed about the concubines getting elevated to become a wife during the Song Dynasty, because it was a major taboo back then. But divorced wives may be sold as concubines or maids. However, the fact that Song Jiang didn't make Po Si his wife or even a concubine, it means that he is really not into her. He just found her a place to stay and covered her expenses as a mistress. Since Song Jiang was more interested in dude bro stuff anyway, he didn't spend much time with his new mistress after the first few nights. Craving love and attention, she had an affair with Song Jiang's colleague instead. Song Jiang was miffed when he caught wind of this rumor, but he didn't really care. Not long after, Liu Tang came to see Song Jiang to give him 100 taels of gold from Cao Kai as a gift. But Song Jiang declined the hefty reward because he was ever so gracious. Now this is going to bite him in the back, because as soon as he left the meeting, he met his mistress's nosy mother, and he was whirlwinded back to spend the night with her daughter. Po Si wasn't too pleased to see him, and he's got nothing to say to her either. So the awkward night just quietly passed. Song Jiang left first thing in the morning. Not long after, he realized that he had left Cao Kai's letter in Po Si's room. Oh crud! He couldn't let anybody see it! so he quickly ran back to get it. But it was too late. Pussy had read and hidden the letter. Now she's using it to extort him. He had to agree to 3 conditions to get the letter back. 1. She wants him to sign a contract on paper to allow her to marry the man she's having an affair with. Sure, Song Jiang agreed. 2. She wants to keep all the jewelry, wardrobe, and furniture he had given her. Sure. The desperate Song Jiang agreed again. As for the final requests, she wanted the 100 taels of gold written in the letter. Whoops, Song Jiang had declined the gift, and personally, he didn't have that kind of money laying around either. Not believing him, Pussy threatened him further, and this time, the threats were barbed by insults. Then, things started to get really heated, and the next thing he knew, Song Jiang had a dagger in his hand, and with it, he ended her violently. When Song Jiang regained his senses, he quickly burned the letter and vamooshed. Soon after, Zhu Tong was dispatched to Song Jiang's family home with a warrant. Back then, collective punishment may be applied to the whole family if the crime was serious enough. But with Song Jiang being a registrar, he had preempted this kind of problem and severed his family ties with a certificate, and he lived in another home. Well, Zhu Tong went in anyway to search, and he uncovered a hidden panel that led to a hiding space. There he is, Song Jiang, his old pal. Zhu Tong was quite a hao han despite being a copper. He came to tell his good friend Song Jiang that he will cover for him, but he had to go ASAP. So after Zhu Tong declared that he couldn't find Song Jiang and directed his crew away, Song Jiang, accompanied by his brother Song Qing, left to find refuge at the philanthropist Cai Jing's place in Changzhou. Over there, Song Jiang met another guest at Cai Jing's, a big and rough man who goes by the name Wu Song. Wu Song was a rude and rough man, certainly not the most pleasant individual to have around. He took refuge at Cai Jing's place for beating up a man, and even his presence had started to grind on his host's patience. Yet, Song Jiang could immediately see the good in him and his heroic nature. The two quickly became close friends and even swore an oath of brotherhood. Throughout this novel, Song Jiang managed to convince the wildest variety of people to join him, whether it be through his godly charm or his devious blackmails. We will see more of that later in the next episode. As for one of the best ways to charm people, it is to be genuinely interested in them. When Wu Song wanted to return home because he missed his biological brother, Song Jiang escorted him and walked for miles together before turning back. The next lesson is to not to be stingy with your money. He gifted Wu Song some money for his traveling expenses, and that made him eternally grateful. In China, the most popular Water Margin character is undoubtedly Wu Song. Even those who didn't know anything about the novel may know this character because he is the subject of various cultural spin-offs. Part of his story had historically been adapted into the various Chinese opera traditions, and also the erotic novel spin-off Jing Ping Mei, or The Plum in the Golden Vase. In that story, he was reduced to a minor character. The most popular part to be adapted into Chinese opera is the chapter where he killed a tiger with his bare hands, which is coming up soon. This chapter almost perfectly exemplifies the 4-act storytelling structure of East Asia, Qi, Cheng, Zuan, He, which was originally used for Chinese poetry, but later applied to various art forms. In Japan, where it became Ki, Shou, Ten, Ketsu, it is even applied to modern manga writing. As Hirohiko Araki, the author of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, explained it best in his book, Qi, or the beginning, is quite easy to understand. This part begins with Wu Song taking a break from his journey and patronized an inn near the Jiang Ridge. The shop had a rule stating that patrons should not cross the pass after drinking more than 3 bowls of wine. Not only that the wine was too strong, there was a tiger out there that had killed 20 to 30 victims.
Oh, shut it!
Wu Song ignored the warning and continued drinking. Now here comes the Cheng. Not long after Wu Song had left the inn, he saw an official warning about the tiger on a tree. Here, the tension rises. Oh, the waiter wasn't kidding. Now, he is getting nervous for real. But it would be too embarrassing for him to turn back. So, he continued his journey a bit further until he started to get woozy due to the alcohol, and he rested on a boulder. Then suddenly, a cold breeze blew through him, followed by the sound of a creature barreling through the bushes. It then leapt at him. Oh gosh, it is real! Wusong barely dodged the tiger's pounce. Then the tiger attacked again, and it missed again. But this time, the beast's back is exposed. Here comes the Zuan. Seizing upon this opportunity, Wusong raised his staff, and with a heavy swing, he broke the staff when it caught a tree during his swing. The beast leapt back to its paws unharmed. Zuan means turn. It could be interpreted as how things turn out, or even a reversal. In essence, a big change will happen, and it may not necessarily happen in the protagonist's favor. And there could be more than one turn. When the tiger pounced, the desperate Wusong risked everything to grab the beast by its neck. To his surprise, he succeeded. So he threw it to the ground, and with a bit of struggle, he climbed onto its back and started raining down his massive iron fist onto the creature's head. After 50 or 60 blows, the life was snuffed out of this murderous beast. Not long after, Wusong was discovered by hunters, and he was brought to the magistrate's office to be rewarded with money and appointment as guard captain. Kets in Japanese means to tie up or outcome. In the Chinese version, the final part is he, which has a slightly different connotation. He means close or coming together. Chinese writers like to end stories with the reunion of family members or friends. So, the moment Wusong left the magistrate's office, he was greeted by his brother Wu Dalang, who missed him greatly. This 4-act story structure can obviously be enclosed within a larger 4-act story structure, like a recursive Mandelbrot set. And at this point, we have reached the Cheng part of this video. This part of the story was actually spun off into the erotic novel Qing, which is named after the 3 central female characters of the novel, and the first character, Qing, is named after Pan Jinglian. Pan Jinglian, the adulterous wife of Wu Dalang, Wusong's sister-in-law, was a relatively tragic character. She was married off to Wu Dalang for free, as punishment for refusing her former master's advance. And ever since then, she had been searching for a new lover to whisk her away from the kind yet ugly dwarf Wu Dalang. Even Wusong became a target for her when they were alone. This angered Wusong. He cryptically warned his naive brother about it as he moved into the army dormitory. Not long after, when Wusong was sent out for a mission, Pan Jinglian met the philanderer Simon Qing, and the two started their illicit relationship, assisted by Granny Wang. They then plotted to poison and kill Wu Dalang. They succeeded and almost got away with it, until the coroner, Uncle He, decided to set aside the bribe money he received and hid away some of Wu Dalang's darkened bones, evidence of his poisoning. In case you are wondering, the first book on forensic science was written during the Song Dynasty China. When Wusong returned, news of his brother's death shook him to the core. Overcome by grief, he tossed and turned that night, and he just couldn't sleep. Then suddenly, he saw his brother's spirit rise from the altar and cried out, "Brother, I met a terrible death." It happened so fast, Wusong wasn't even sure if he really saw it or he was just dreaming. But one thing for sure, he was determined to investigate his brother's death. Eventually, he found Uncle He, and he was provided with his testimony and evidence he had put away. Unfortunately, the evidence wasn't enough to persecute the culprit. So the impatient Wusong decided to play judge, jury, and executioner. He coerced some neighbors to be his witness and made Pan Jinglian and Granny Wang confess their crimes. Once they did, he executed Jinglian and proceeded to finish off Simon Qing. In the erotic novel Jing, these two adulterers did not die here. In that version, Wusong accidentally killed the wrong person and he had to run away, allowing the two to live long enough for a major part of the 100-chapter novel. Later, in court, Granny Wang was sentenced to death for assisting murder. As for Wusong, Obviously, the magistrates cannot tolerate this act of vigilantism, despite everyone standing on his side. On account of him handing himself to the law and other considerations, he was given a relatively light sentence and exiled to the prison fortress at Mengzhou. Along his journey, Wusong and his guards came across a very suspicious inn. Wusong acted to be oblivious at first and pretended to drink the wine he was served. When his guards started to fall unconscious after drinking it, he pretended to fall unconscious too. Just as he was about to be carried away and butchered into meat bun stuffing, he jumped into action and subdued the hostess. Obviously, Wusong was too much for her and her servants to handle, so a man rushed out to beg for mercy. His name was Qing, the gardener, and he apologized for his wife Sun Ernyang, the female yaksha's attempt to rob and butcher him. They even offered to take out the guards and send him to Twin Dragon's Peak to seek refuge with their friend, Lu Zhishen. Wusong appreciated the offer but declined it. Nevertheless, they became friends after this misunderstanding. When Wusong reached Mengzhou, he was treated unexpectedly well. Apparently, the warden's son, Si-en, was his fan. Grateful for his fine treatment, he decided to do the kid a favor. Apparently, Si-en's inn was recently taken over by a ruffian, and he needed Wusong's help to drive him away.
Ah, too easy.
As he made his way to the inn, Wusong made many stops along the way to keep himself topped up with wine. The more drunk he gets, the more powerful he becomes, he claimed. True enough, he beat up the ruffian easily and drove him away. Thus, he spent the next month idly at Si-en's inn. Then, one day, Wusong received an invitation to General Zhang's house. Apparently, the general had heard news of his bravery and entertained him as honored family guest for the next few days. Wusong was treated like royalty. The general even promised to marry off a singer girl to him, Yulan. Oh wow, can life even get any better? Wusong thought. Later that night, while he was practicing martial arts, Wusong heard someone cry out, "Thief! Thief!" Well, it is about time he returned some of the general's favor, he thought. Yulan pointed Wusong to where the thief had run off to. But when he got there, all the general's guards piled up on him and arrested him. Moments later, it was reported that they had found stolen goods among Wusong's possessions. It was a setup, Wusong realized. The magistrate then sentenced Wusong to be caned and banished to somewhere further. Apparently, the ruffian had bribed the general through a friend to set up Wusong as revenge. Wusong only learned about this when Si-en came around to tell him the result of his investigation. Si-en also warned him that the guards escorting him were up to no good. Sure enough, the guards tried to silence him along the journey. But Wusong had already prepared for this, and he was the one who snuffed them out instead. Now we have reached the Zuan part of this video. Instead of escaping, Wusong returned to the general's residence seeking revenge. He killed any servants that crossed his path. And to his dark fortune, he found the general, ruffian, and their friend in the same room. He rushed in to cut them down before they could even react. But that wasn't enough. After the venomous betrayal he had experienced, he had become a flaming pillar of rage. His desire for revenge cannot be so easily quenched. So he proceeded to wreak havoc all over the manor, killing the general's wife, maids, the treacherous Yulan, and even the children in the household. He claimed 15 victims altogether, many of them innocent. In various adaptations, they reduced the number and removed the child killing, because it was just too violent for most people. But what the novel wants us to know here is that Wusong had become a true monster. This chapter also marked a shift in the general tone of the novel. The writer wanted to remind you that these outlaws are not your half-baked, misunderstood hero. They are true sinners who are barely hanging onto the precipice of good and evil. Not long after he left the mansion, a bunch of goons grabbed Wusong and brought him to Sun Ernyang's shop. After he told her and her husband everything that happened, they gave him a traveling Buddhist monk's clothing and a monk's certificate, someone they butchered a while ago, and directed him to seek refuge at Twin Dragon's Peak. Somewhere along his way, Wusong saved a woman who had been abducted by an evil Taoist priest. This shows that perhaps he hasn't completely gone over the edge. Even though his monk's attire was just a costume, Wusong's adoption of his Buddhist monk persona until the end of the book symbolizes his path towards atonement. Atonement and redemption is a theme in Water Margin that is not often mentioned, perhaps because it is often overshadowed by all the action scenes. But of course, Wusong couldn't just change with a snap of a finger. Along his journey, he got drunk and started a fight with a group of strangers. Eventually, he was overwhelmed and tied up because his opponents had over 20 people on their side. After a bit of deserved beating, someone came around and ordered Wusong to be released. When Wusong looked up, he realized that it was his good old swan brother, Song Jiang. Apparently, Wusong had inadvertently picked a fight with his friends, Kong Ming and Kong Liang. Whoops, how embarrassing. Thus, we have the He of this episode. Wusong was reunited with his sworn sibling, Song Jiang, and the spotlight returned to him once again. After briefly celebrating their reunion, Song Jiang and Wusong parted ways again, because Wusong's destination, Twin Dragon's Peak, was on a different direction to Song Jiang's destination. For the past few months, Song Jiang had been couch surfing, staying with his various friends, and this time he's going to crash at his old pal Huarong's place. He was hoping that a general amnesty will eventually be announced and his crime of killing his mistress, Yan Po-si, will be pardoned. He didn't know when that day would come, but since he is so prodigious at making friends, he is not worried about running out of people to mooch from. One thing he is worried about though is his father, so he had sent his brother Song Qing home to check up on him. But he hasn't received any news from him yet.
Hey, you, stick him up!
Oh crud! What luck! While traversing the mountain path, Song Jiang was kidnapped by a short and ugly bandit captain named Wang, the Stumpy Tiger. Song Jiang was then brought to his base to be presented to their leader, Yan Sun, and cohort Zheng Tianshou.
Oh, this fat cow's heart and liver will make great sweet and sour soup,
Wang Ying laughed. Song Jiang, oh Song Jiang, I can't believe you will meet your end like this. Song Jiang called out his own name in despair.
What did you say?
Yan Sun asked. This is going to be a recurring theme in this novel. It seems that Song Jiang had somehow gained celebrity status for his philanthropy and the killing of his mistress. Almost everybody in Jianghu had heard about him by now, and whenever people hear his name, they will immediately stop whatever they are doing and befriend him. It is a bit silly in my opinion, since he really didn't do enough to deserve this kind of reputation, but it is a trope in Chinese fiction. So after the bandits released Song Jiang, they threw feasts in his honor for days, and even released an innocent lady captured by Wang Ying for his sake. Song Jiang practically saved her from the defilement of this lecherous bandit. To make up for it, he promised that he would find him a wife one day. But Song Jiang didn't just rely on his reputation to gain friends and allies. There are also some dark arts that he will use to secure allegiances, and you will see them in action soon. After a week of carousing, Song Jiang finally made his way to the city to see his old friend Huarong, the master archer. He will be one of Song Jiang's most reliable general in his future campaigns. His presence in the city also came to the attention of the woman he saved. She turned out to be the governor's wife. But instead of being grateful to him, she wanted Song Jiang arrested because she thought that he was in league with the bandits who had captured her. Huarong was also a governor of the city, but he was the military governor. Her husband, the civil governor, outranked him, so he could not prevent Song Jiang from being arrested. During the Song Dynasty, there was a strong emphasis on the civil over the military. That's why Huarong was overruled by his civil counterpart, even though they were both theoretically on the same rank. So he had no choice but to rescue Song Jiang and sought refuge with the bandits. Predictably, the governor sent out some generals to subdue the bandits. Huang Xing, followed by Qing Ming. They both lost the battle, and Qing Ming was captured, despite him being a very talented general. Song Jiang and the rest really wanted him to join their side, so they treated him really well, throwing him plenty of feasts even. But obviously, that won't be enough to get this straight-laced military man to turn. and this is where Song Jiang's dark arts come in. A few days later, when they released Qingming to return to the city, he discovered that part of the city was destroyed. Apparently, the city was attacked and people were killed while he was away, and the culprit was disguised as him during the attack. So the governor executed Qingming's wife and was about to kill him too for the treachery. Qingming was framed, and with the governor's men charging at him, this poor general had no choice but to return to the bandit hideout and throw his lot with Song Jiang and the others. To smoothen the deal, Song Jiang acted as a matchmaker and offered Hua Rong's sister as replacement wife. She wasn't consulted for this decision, but it is just how patriarchal society functioned. With Qingming on their side, they flipped Huang Xing too, and together they conquered the city easily and executed the governor. However, they spared the occupants of the city and ordered them not to be harmed. As for the governor's wife, well, the lecherous Wang Ying wanted to keep her for his carnal entertainment.
Denied!
Yan Sun executed her. You know, this group of Hao Han is just full of contradiction and hypocrisy. They don't mind killing people to set Qingming up, but they spared the city after capturing it. So it is okay to be murderous cannibals, but you will never catch them sexually assaulting a woman on screen or disrespecting their parents. So in ancient Chinese Confucian society, the moral red line was drawn at how you treat your parents, and you need to be sexually conservative. Interesting, huh? Anyway, now that they had created quite a ruckus, they needed to move before the government threw a larger army at them. So they decided to join the Mount Liang bandits. En route, they came across Lu Fang, a Lu Bu fanboy, and Guo Sheng, the fictional ancestor of Guo Qing, the main character from the classic Wuxia novel Legend of the Condor Heroes. They stopped their duel and joined the band the moment they heard Song Jiang's name mentioned. Unfortunately, Song Jiang was not fated to join the Liangshan bandits yet, because his brother, Song Qing, had sent a messenger, Si Yong, to inform him that his father had died and he needed to return home ASAP. Song Jiang was so distraught, he quickly wrote an introduction letter for his entourage and rushed home by himself. But it turned out to be a classic Asian parent trick. His father lied about his death because he missed Song Jiang too much, and Song Qing was in on it. Unfortunately, this little trick quickly turned into a disaster for Song Jiang. He was quickly spotted and captured by some officers. Luckily for him, his mistress's mother had died in the interim, and since there were no more plaintiff or witnesses, he got a relatively lighter sentence, which was further alleviated by him bribing the officials. Ironically, in Song Dynasty, the officials were compensated much better than in other dynasties, but corruption still occurred because it was tolerated by corrupt chancellors like Cai Jing, a historical figure blamed for the decline of Song Dynasty. Punishments were not properly enforced either, because the emperor, Huizong, was more of an artist than an administrator. In Water Margin, the practice of bribery was quite vividly described. When you want to bribe someone, you don't just pay the money to one person. You need to grease the hands of everyone related, so that the other officials won't get jealous and rat you out. Obviously, you need to give more money to those who are higher ranked. When you are exiled, you need to bring money with you too, so you can bribe your way into a comfortable life at your new destination. In most other books, bribery and corruption is usually looked down upon. But in Water Margin, you are practically provided with an instruction manual for bribery. Corruption back then had become a fact of life. The outlaws from Mount Liang could rescue him anytime, obviously, but he declined their offer because at this point, he was still trying to serve his sentence out, so that one day he could still return to society. Along his journey to his place of exile, he befriended quite a few interesting figures too, mostly pirates and street martial art performers, who he inadvertently ticked off but finally won over. I'm going to skip these filler chapters because they are not very important. Anyway, at his place of exile, he befriended Tai Zong, the magic traveler, the chief warden, who was also an old friend of Professor Wu Yong. Well, the novel had been quite down-to-earth and mundane so far, but this is actually the turning point where we're starting to get introduced to some magic. and the story is beginning to look a lot like an RPG adventure now. Taizong could tie up some Taoist talismans around his ankles and travel really fast, 500 li a day, making him an invaluable member of the team. Song Jiang also met Li Kui, a warden who will become his most loyal pit bull, a murderous, bloodthirsty, cannibalistic pit bull. He will play a very important narrative role as Song Jiang's foil, but we will talk about this later. Song Jiang was supposed to be serving his sentence at Jiangzhou, but since he bribed and befriended all the wardens, his sentence felt a lot like a holiday, and he could visit various inns to enjoy local delicacies and wine. One day, when he was drunk, he wrote a poem about his great potential, and he was just biding his time to rise. If he succeeds, he can laugh at Huang Cao's feeble attempt. Huang Cao was the rebel whose rebellion led to the collapse of the Tang Dynasty. I have covered Huang Cao in one of my previous videos. If you know anything about Huang Cao, then this is a very clear foreshadowing of Song Jiang's ambition and the plot direction of this novel. So I'm not going to spoil it now, but you can watch the video if you want to get some clues. Predictably, this poem got him into trouble because Huang Wenbing, the governor's assistant, saw it as a seditious declaration. So, to escape persecution, Song Jiang did the whole pretending to be insane stick by covering himself with feces. Yeah, it is a trope in Chinese stories. Character pretending to be crazy will try to prove their insanity by eating and playing with poop. The historical precedence for this was set by King Qin in the 5th century BCE. I have a video about him too. Sadly, this trick did not work on Huang Wenbing. He was just too sharp and saw through the ruse. He ordered Song Jiang to be beaten until he confessed. The beating was so severe, Song Jiang eventually broke character and admitted his crime. Torture was a legitimate method to extract information back then. Taizong was then instructed to deliver a letter to the governor's father, Chancellor Cai Jing, requesting further instruction on how to deal with this rebel. Along the way, Taizong was intercepted by Zhu Gui, a Mount Liang outlaw, and all the outlaws were alarmed by Song Jiang's predicament. Cao Gai, with his predilection for heists, recruited Xiao Rang, a master calligrapher who forged him a letter, and Qing Dynasty, master carver, to fake the official stamp. Their family members were brought to the mountain to be, quotation marks, secured, in case the authorities were to harass them for assisting the outlaws. But it is really a failed threat. The forged letter ordered Song Jiang to be transferred to the capital so he could be intercepted and saved en route. However, there was a fatal flaw with the letter, and by the time they realized it, Taizong was already gone. The biggest problem here was that the forged letter was signed off with Cai Jing's own name. But obviously, a father won't sign off a letter to his own son with his own name. And sure enough, Huang Wenbing detected the flaw, and both Song Jiang and Taizong was put on the chopping block. They will be executed in public, ASAP, before the outlaws could carry out whatever conspiracy they are planning. The execution drew a crowd. Obviously, a lot of people wanted to see the execution of a celebrity like Song Jiang, and this sea of people makes for a convenient cover for a clandestine group of conspirators. The moment the order was cried out, a whirlwind of a man struck the guards. Li Kui, the black whirlwind, chopped them into pieces with his twin axes. Then, a torrent of swords and spears followed, as the captains of Liangshan outlaws threw away their disguises and came to Song Jiang's rescue. They were assisted by Song Jiang's new friends too. Together, these Hao Hans carved out a bloodied escape route and spirited their friend to safety. Now it is payback time! Once they regrouped, they raised their bandit army to crush the city. Next, they turned their attention to the little town where Huang Wenbing lived. With the assistance of Ho Jian, Huang family's servant, they were able to find the credence's house. Apparently, Huang Wenbing's brother was a nice guy, so they let him live. But they massacred the rest of Huang Wenbing's family and captured him for torture. Li Kui was given the honor to do the gruesome deed, so he sliced the scoundrel bit by bit, cooked the pieces, and ate him, before finally making a soup out of his heart and liver as hangover cure for everyone. There are plenty of stories of cannibalism in China, and they fall mostly into two categories. One is hunger, which is often encountered in war and famine, and the other one is humiliation. That is a Chinese expression, wanting to peel off your enemy's skin and eat their flesh. It means that you hate someone so much, you want to do the worst things possible to him. Another form of humiliation is to gouge out somebody's heart and liver. This way, the victim will die in the most culturally gruesome way. You will often see this phrase written in literature, and it is very prevalent in this novel. Cooking someone is another method of dealing a humiliating death, and it is even more cruel to feed their cooked flesh to their family member. This death by cooking had historically been used by the last king of Shang Dynasty to humiliate his duke, and it led to an uprising that eventually overthrew the dynasty and established the Zhou dynasty. The first emperor of Han Dynasty, Liao was also threatened by his rival Xiang Yu that he would cook his father unless he surrendered. But the rascal managed to bluff his way out of it. So, the combination of these three practices means that you are doing the most humiliating thing to someone. In ancient narratives and fiction, this kind of death is usually reserved for tyrants and the worst corrupt officials. Nobody actually eats human meat because they like the taste. Except for maybe Li Kui, but he is kinda special. He is written to be the monster, the forthright, cruel, and murderous foil to Song Jiang's righteous hypocrisy. He is the yin to Song Jiang's yang, but he is not just an abstract literary character. When it comes to running violent organizations, you will see characters like him quite often in Triad and Yakuza stories. The mad dog, the enforcer that will commit all the violence for the boss, while keeping the boss clean enough to do the negotiations. At the same time, characters like Li Kui serves as a narrative time bomb, the wild card that will throw an axe into Song Jiang's plan time and again. Ironically, it is often to their advantage. It is really difficult to get rid of this kind of follower because he is just too violently loyal to you, so you will have to weigh his usefulness to the liability he will bring. This duality is further accentuated by the following chapters when they went to pick up their parents to bring them to the safety of Mount Liang. As the company grew, they attracted volunteers who wanted to join them. But Song Jiang still couldn't officially join the outlaws yet. He had to do just one more thing. He had to bring his father with him to the mountain for safety. And when he returned home, he was chased around by soldiers again. When he found refuge at the temple, the mystic goddess of the nine heavens revealed herself to him and told him about his destiny as the leader of the 108 stars. His duty was to defend the country and eradicate evil, and he was given 3 magical books that will assist him. Because evil still exists in his own heart, he could not return to heaven yet, and even she could not save him if he committed more sins. After Song Jiang's outlaw friends rescued him and his father, Song Jiang then officially joined the outlaws. When Li Kui goes home to pick up his mother, he had to be chaperoned by Zhu Gui, who was ordered to keep him out of trouble. Well, since Zhu Gui wanted to see his brother Zhu Fu in the nearby town anyway, that's all fine by him. While Zhu Gui was catching up with his brother, Li Kui continued the rest of his journey by himself. Along the way, Li Kui met an imposter who stole his identity and robbed people under his name. He defeated the imposter easily, but spared him because the imposter lied about having an old mother that he had to take care of. Later on, however, when Li Kui paid a local woman to make him food, she turned out to be the imposter's wife. By chance, he overheard the plot to kill him, so he took the initiative to kill the imposter first. Since the woman who got away had cooked a lot of rice, and there is no meat around, Li Kui barbecued the imposter's flesh and ate it as side dish. Yep, that's gruesome, but the wheel of karma will turn on Li Kui soon. Because everyone in the village hates Li Kui, including his own brother, Li Kui had to run away with his mother on his back. Sadly, while he was away looking for water to quench her thirst, a pack of tigers had devoured her. This is his retribution for eating so many people. The raging Li Kui cut the 4 beasts down with his axe. Ironically, this turned Li Kui into a local hero, until he was arrested again when the imposter's wife accused him of murdering her husband. He was eventually rescued by Zhu Gui and his brother Zhu Fu. The guard captain who was ordered to transfer him, Li Ying, was also recruited because he was a friend of Zhu Fu. He would get into trouble if he were to return after failing to transfer the prisoner. Without his mother, the only anchor Li Kui had was Song Jiang. Now the two of them are virtually connected at the waist. Thus, these two personalities came to represent the yin and yang of the Liangshan bandits. Since Song Jiang was so famous and influential, and due to the fact that he had stacked the members of Mount Liang with the people he introduced to the organization, he was promoted to be the Joint Chief of the Outlaws, ranking only slightly below Cao Ge. Meanwhile, the other named outlaws served as captains for their respective divisions: infantry, cavalry, scouting, logistics, and so on. Day by day, more and more people were attracted to join the outlaws due to their fame. And they had grown so large, they had to start thinking about securing new source of supplies. But they can't just rob anyone, since they are supposed to be honorable bandits after all. They needed a pretext to raid for supplies. As written in the Sun Tzu's Art of War, the first of the 5 fundamental factors of war was moral justification. Nurhaci, the patriarch of the Manchu people, who laid the foundation of the Qing Dynasty to conquer China, claimed to have learned everything about warfare from Romance of the Three Kingdoms and Water Margin stories. Many people are quite familiar with the former, so let's take the opportunity to learn some strategic lessons from the latter. But before we do that, where the heck is the Taoist priest Gongsun Seng anyway? It's been a really long time since he went to visit his mother, and he hasn't returned yet. So they sent Daizong, the magic traveler, to find him. Somehow, Daizong just couldn't seem to find him. But on his journey, he met quite a few characters who wanted to join the famous Liangshan bandits. He also met Yang Xiong and Si Xiu, who would have their own few chapters of side story, which culminates into them killing Yang Xiong's adulterous wife and them needing to seek refuge at Mount Liang. Si Qian, who witnessed the murder, tagged along as traveling companion because he wanted to join too. Along the way, however, Si Qian was arrested at the Zhu family manor for stealing and eating their chicken. So when they reached Mount Liang, Song Jiang found his pretext to raid the Zhu family. It is also a preemptive self-defense, since the Zhu family had boasted about their plan to arrest the Mount Liang bandits and send them to the authorities. As they fought, the Zhu family turned out to be quite formidable, and with the addition of Hu and Li family as their allies, Song Jiang couldn't even win even though he had the heavenly books guiding him. So he had to come up with some schemes to break them apart. First of all, Song Jiang gave the Li family some gifts to have them stop helping the Zhu family. Since the master of Li family, Li Ying, was a friend of Yang Xiong and Si Xiu, and he was recently injured by a member of the Zhu family, Song Jiang received silent assurances that the Li family won't make any moves. As for the Hu family, Song Jiang captured Hu Sanyang, their warrior woman, in battle. It was a tough fight. In the process of capturing her, it was Wang Ying and a few others who got captured instead. Eventually, it was Ling Cong who managed to capture her. She proved to be an important bargaining chip. The Hu family will stop supporting Zhu family for her safe return. For the final piece of his stratagem, Song Jiang planted a few sleeper agents in Zhu family manor. They had recently acquired some new recruits who are friends of the members of the Zhu family. So, upon launching their next frontal assault, the sleeper agents rose up, killed everyone left back in the manor, and locked the Zhu family warriors out. Confused and outmaneuvered, they were eventually wiped out by the Liangshan bandits. They have won gloriously, but it won't be Water Margin if there isn't Li Kui making a mess of everything. In his battle frenzy, he massacred members of the Hu family who had an agreement with them. So, to resolve this matter, they arranged a marriage between Hu Sanyang and one of their members, Wang Ying. Song Jiang had promised to find him a wife a while ago, so he practically killed 2 birds with 1 stone with this move. Hu Sanyang agreed to the marriage due to Song Jiang's sincerity. Well, admittedly, romance is not the strong suit of Si Nai An and Luo Guanzong, the authors of Water Margin. They are like today's shonen action manga authors. If you want romance back then, there was actually a separate genre called the Scholar and Beauty. The name comes from the fact that the male main characters are almost always soy boy scholars, and the heroines are pretty women. As for the Li family, they were suspected to have collaborated with the outlaws, so they were arrested by the government. Luckily, the Liangshan bandits came in the nick of time and killed the governor. To make sure that Li Ying joined Mount Liang, their manor was burned down and their family members were transported to the mountain for safety. It is kind of funny how the threats posed by these other houses are so conveniently neutralized, isn't it? All the while, Song Jiang still appeared as the good guy. The biggest lesson Nur Hatsu could have learned from Water Margin was the importance of talented personnel and the application of their expertise. Additionally, it also provides a lot of lessons on how to coerce people to join your team. This novel pretty much teaches you the dark arts of warfare. While the outlaws were celebrating, more people came to join them. And this time, it is Song Jiang's old friend, Lei Heng, who came knocking. He got into trouble for killing a woman who hurt his mother. Meanwhile, his friend Zhu Tong was arrested and exiled for letting him escape. Well, Song Jiang had always wanted to be reunited with his old friends, so he sent some people to recruit him. However, Zhu Tong was content with his new life, and he was trusted by the new governor to look after his son. So Li Kui grabbed the kid and killed the innocent boy. It was quite a monstrous act. Lots of adaptations censored this scene. This is why a lot of people hated Li Kui. But to be fair, it was done under Song Jiang's direct order. This is written in the original version. Zhu Tong could have killed the brute had Cai Jing not calmed the situation down. Now, Zhu Tong had no choice but to join the outlaws. But he will remember this grudge against Li Kui, and he wouldn't want to see him anywhere in the headquarters. So in the meantime, Li Kui had to stay at Cai Jing's place for a bit. Of course, Li Kui being Li Kui stirred up trouble again. When Cai Jing got into an argument with a ruffian who killed his uncle, Li Kui just killed the man. But that man happened to be the brother-in-law of Gao Lian, the governor of Gao Tang, and he was also Grand Marshal Gao Qiu's brother. Cai Jing then told Li Kui to escape. He was sure that the official could do him no harm since he had the iron certificate. He just had to find it somewhere. He left it in his other home. The iron certificate is an imperial guarantee that the holder could not be persecuted by law, except for the crime of sedition. His family was given this because he came from the royal lineage of the previous dynasty, later Zhou. According to the novel, Zhao Kuangying, the first emperor of Song Dynasty, felt guilty about usurping the throne, so he gave this to their family. Historically, death exemption privileges exist, but they come in various shapes and forms throughout different dynasties. The medal shape, popularized in various media, is just one of them. However, there was no record that the royal lineage of the later Zhou was given this privilege. This plot point may be inspired by a similar folktale. It claims that Zhao Kuangying, the first emperor of Song, erected a secret stele, ordering his descendants to give the later Zhou lineage preferential treatment. They cannot be executed for any crimes besides treason. So this plot point sounded plausible, but it is not historically backed. Anyway, the iron certificate did not arrive in time, and the corrupt official Gao Lian arrested Cai Jing. In response, the Liangshan bandits rode out to rescue him. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because Gao Lian turned out to be a formidable sorcerer, and with his magic, he easily defeated Song Jiang and the rest. At this point, magic had entered the narrative, and fantasy is added to the novel's genre. This story is looking a lot more like an RPG game now. To counter this, they have to find the Taoist Gong Sun Seng immediately. Tai Zong was ordered to go look for him again, and Li Kui tagged along because he was bored. These few chapters are just side stories where we see Li Kui create more mess and gets punished for it. At last, when they found Gong Sun Seng, the Taoist priest was reluctant to leave because he wanted to take care of his elderly mother and he wanted to continue his studies with his master. So, to sever his connection, Li Kui tried to assassinate the Taoist master at night. But when he cut the master down, instead of blood, white solution bled out of him.
Wow, this virgin must be really backed up.
Yep, this novel got quite a few racy jokes here and there. But on the next day, Li Kui was surprised to discover that the master came back to life. Now, he permitted Gongsun Seng to assist Song Jiang, but punished Li Kui with magic. Li Kui is just like a big murderous baby who got a slap on his wrist each time he committed atrocity. On their way back, they picked up another recruit, Tang Long. Now, with the powered-up Gongsun Seng on their side, Gao Lian is toast. With a ray of golden light, he dispelled the corrupt official's foul magic, and then the Liangshan bandits proceeded to thoroughly trash their enemy. It is interesting that they usually just use their magic to dispel their enemy's magic, and win by real fighting. Except for a filler chapter, which feels out of place, but I will discuss that later when I get there. By winning the battle with real combat, it just feels manlier, and give the other characters something to do. However, there is perhaps another reason why they don't want to use magic as crutch. It might be the stigma of superstition in Song Dynasty. The emperors of Song Dynasty were notoriously superstitious. Huizong, the emperor featured in the novel, was one of the worst. He was led to believe that he was the reincarnation of a Taoist god by a charlatan, and he fervently promoted Taoism. His son and successor, Qingzong, was even worse. He believed in a Taoist priest who claims that his small contingent of divine soldiers, protected by his invincibility spell, could defend the empire from the Jurchen invasion. Obviously, that didn't work out for them, and it led to the Jingkang incident, a series of atrocities that devastated the Song court and led to the establishment of the Southern Song dynasty. Interestingly, their ancestor, Emperor Zhenzong, was also very superstitious. He periodically claimed that he received magical books from heaven, just like Song Jiang did. The fact that Song Jiang's book didn't prove to be that useful throughout the novel might be a jab at that. But who really knows what the writer was thinking? Angered by the death of his brother, Gao Qiu pulled out the big guns and sent out the formidable general Hu Yanzuo and his trusted lieutenants. Using his linked cavalry formation, he easily defeated Song Jiang, and the latter was forced to bunker down in his mountain fortress. When Hu Yanzuo tried to get the cannoneer Ling Zhen to knock down their defenses, the outlaws captured and recruited him instead. Here is another lesson in warfare. Be adaptable. The Liangshan bandits can adopt not just magic, but also technology into their repertoire. To win this fight, they need the help of Xu Ning, who they drew to their camp by stealing his precious armor. He then taught them how to craft and use the hook spear technique. And using that new technology, they nullified Hu Yanzhou's linked cavalry formation and defeated him. Now, here is another lesson in war psychology. Defeated enemies will usually try to prey on smaller targets to regain their confidence and strength. People often use their poor predicament to justify attacking others. But in this case, there is at least some justification. Hu Yanzuo attacked the nearby bandit groups even though it was not part of his assignment. He figured that he would be in better position if he returned with some small achievements instead of going back empty-handed. But he really kicked the hornet's nest when he attracted the attention of the various local bandit groups, including the Flowery monk Lu Zhishen's band. But still, Hu Yanzuo was a tough warrior, so they had to call upon the support of Mount Liang to finally defeat him. Naturally, Hu Yanzuo and his lieutenants were recruited by Song Jiang after their defeat. With this glorious victory against the government expedition force, the Liangshan bandits' fame shot up to astronomical heights. Other bandit groups started to merge with them, and more high-profile outlaws that had appeared from earlier chapters started to join too. Zhu Wu requested Song Jiang to save their friend Jing, the nine-tattooed dragon who was imprisoned by the local governor. So they came up with a scheme to hijack the imperial ceremonial bell and ordered the governor to come up to the mountain to offer his prayers. They killed the corrupt governor and returned the bell to the Grand Marshal Su Yuanjing. They treated him well because he is a nice guy. This man is virtually the only righteous official in court and will become their political ally one day. For some strange reason, Jing became the jobber of the group. he kept losing battles to show how powerful the enemy is. Their fame also attracted challengers. A band of bandits led by the Taoist sorcerer Fan Rui tried to claim Mount Liang, but his magic was no match for Gong Sun Seng and his 8 trigram formation, which was used by Zhuge Liang. You often hear about this 8 trigram formation being described as the ultimate formation in many Chinese literatures, but it is just a highly fantasized version of the real one. With Fan Rui defeated, his group also joined Mount Liang. Fan Rui himself became part of the magic division. Song Jiang's band is so famous now, he even got a fan from distant lands coming to join him and presented him with a legendary steed. Duan Jingzu, with his blonde hair and red beard, implied that he was of foreign descent. He is practically the token foreigner in the story. He also told Song Jiang that he was robbed of his horse when he was at Chengkou City. They didn't relent, even though he told them that the horse was a present for Song Jiang. Well, that sounds like they've got no respect for the Liangshan bandits. After sending Tai Zong to investigate the city, they discovered that the people were actually boasting that they are going to capture Cao Kai and the Mount Liang bandits. Ooh, the gall of these people. So, what is Song Jiang going to do about this? Obviously, Song Jiang had to go and teach these upstarts a lesson. But wait, Cao Kai stopped him. He will go instead, and no amount of reasoning or pleas could stop him. As we know, Mount Liang is not a den of simple-minded, jolly cooperators. There are actually quite a lot of internal conflict, and Cao Kai was obviously jealous of Song Jiang's achievements. Even when his banner broke on his departure, which was a bad omen, he did not cancel his campaign. Unsurprisingly, his desperate attempt to regain relevancy turned out to be his downfall. While waging war with the Cheng family, he was gravely wounded by their combat instructor's poisonous arrow. Thus, the Liangshan bandits had no choice but to retreat. On his deathbed, Cao Kai proclaimed that the one who captured the Cheng family's combat instructor, Si Wenkong, will be the new leader of Mount Liang. Well, this is obviously not going to be an easy task. Si Wenkong was much more competent than they had ever expected. This is going to be a very hard task, and they couldn't even imagine the amounts of sub-quests they need to do in between. Not long after, they heard rumors of a very powerful warrior called Lu Junyi who could defeat him. So they decided to recruit this man, and Wu Yong volunteered to do the job by disguising himself as a fortune teller. In ancient China, Confucian scholars hated superstition, but that didn't stop the emperors and many of the common folks from believing in prophecies and fortune-telling. I think we can divide prophecies into various categories: eschatological, omens, and the more mundane fortune-telling. Eschatological or apocalyptical prophecies exists for different sects of Buddhism and Taoism, but each sect may have their own version, or none at all. Many Chinese Mahayana Buddhists believe in the Maitreya Buddha, the future Buddha who will bring back Buddha's teaching after it is forgotten. But the number of believers of each sect is limited. That's why China did not have a coherent vision of the apocalypse, unlike societies dominated by monotheistic religions such as Christianity and Islam. Omens and signs, on the other hand, are quite common. Confucians do not reject them outright, or at least they just record in the history books what was popularly believed. Liu Bang, the first emperor of the Han Dynasty, was recorded to have been conceived after his mother dreamt of gods, and his father saw a dragon floating above her. At the birth of the first emperor of Song Dynasty, Zhao Huangying, it was recorded that there was red light in the room, mysterious fragrance, and his body was gold in color for 3 days. These kinds of miraculous births are not limited to emperors. Other important people were claimed to have had them too, and it usually means that the child is destined for something greater, whatever it is. Then there are also normal fortune-telling, and fortune tellers may read your fortune through your palm, face, time of birth, or other means. Ancient Chinese believe in predestination, But at the same time, they believe that their fate can always be changed. Like Lu Junyi, for example. He was fooled by Wu Yong into thinking that he would experience a disaster in the near future. And to prevent it, Wu Yong made him write seemingly innocuous passages on the wall and told him to stay somewhere else until the disaster is averted. But obviously, that was a trap, because as he passed by Mount Liang, he and his steward were captured by the bandits. They treated him with courtesy. But someone respectable like him can't join the bandits, of course. So Song Jiang let Lu Junyi's steward, Li Gu, go a few days earlier before releasing him too. Later, when Lu Junyi made his way home, he was surprised to find his trusty servant, Yan Qing, reduced to begging in the streets. Apparently, Li Gu had been having an affair with Lu Junyi's wife and kicked him out. The master of the house couldn't believe this, until he went home and was arrested by the officers summoned by Li Gu. Wu Yong had fooled him into thinking that his master had agreed to join the bandits, and the innocuous passage had a hidden meaning. If you read the first character on every line, it says that Lu Junyi rebels. So Li Gu used this opportunity to betray his master and anti-art him. Okay, now that the chain of traps is completed, Lu Junyi had become an outlaw. He would have no choice but to join the bandits. All they had to do now is to break him out of prison. But this task turned out to be a lot harder than they thought. Some of the Liangshan agents were even captured. But since they bribed the guards, their friends would be safe for a while. To subdue the bandits, the government sent Guan Sheng, the fictional descendant of Guan Yu, the famous general from the Three Kingdoms era, who also happened to be his spitting image. Which is great for me, because I get to recycle my old asset. Predictably, he and his lieutenants were defeated and recruited by the bandits. Suddenly, in the middle of the campaign, Song Jiang was warned by Cao Kai's ghost of an impending calamity, and he fell sick. Luckily, Zhang Sun knew a good doctor, and after completing his side story, he recruited Dr. An Daoquan and Wang Dingliu along the way. Once Song Jiang was cured, they took a covert approach to rescue Lu Junyi and infiltrated the city. This time, they succeeded, and Lu Junyi get to have his revenge on his steward and ex-wife. The government retaliated by sending the Fire and Water General against them. Guan Sheng was tasked to lead a contingent against them, while Li Kui went AWOL because they won't let him be part of the fun. Somehow, this big baby of a man recruited some outlaws and helped the battle by destroying the enemy base. The enemy generals then surrendered and were then recruited. Boy, that's a lot of side quests to avenge Cao Kai. Anyway, after all this distraction, the Liangshan bandits finally launched their campaign to avenge their former leader. Wu Yong tried to give Song Jiang an edge by giving him the best position to capture Si Wengong so that he could become the leader. But he gave it to Lu Junyi instead because he wanted him to be the leader. For some reason. Predictably, Lu Junyi captured Si Wengong and they ended up recruiting their enemy's fast rider, Yu Baosi. After executing Si Wengong, Song Jiang was about to give the leadership position away, but Lu Junyi himself and all the other bandits protested. He was just a newcomer. He couldn't be the leader, Lu Junyi said. To appease everyone, they will settle this with a final contest. Each of them will conquer a city, and the faster person to do it will become the official leader of Mount Liang. As if it was predestined, Song Jiang won the contest and recruited the enemy general, Dong Ping. He then moved to reinforce Lu Junyi, whose progress was stalled by the rock-slinging enemy general Zhang Qing and his lieutenants. After they were defeated and recruited, Song Jiang finally became the official leader of Mount Liang, and at the same time, he had also gathered all 108 Stars of Destiny. This is a cause for celebration! As they gave their thanks to the heaven, the Taoist Gongsun Sheng was tasked to request a divine sign. After a few days of prayers, a portal from heaven opened up, and a tablet shot out of the hole. On it was engraved the position and rank of the 108 stars, the 36 heavenly and 72 earthly stars. So, they renamed their assembly hall to the Hall of Loyalty and put up a banner with the slogan, "To do heaven's will." As the mystic lady of the ninth heaven had told him, their task was to eradicate evil and defend the country from external and internal threats. But like every Chinese prophecy, the message was very cryptic, and there wasn't a clear instruction on how they should go about doing it. However, Song Jiang's got an idea. Hey, you know what? Let's surrender to the government.
What?
Obviously, this plan caught many by surprise. Li Kui and Wu Song were fuming. This sounds like a major plot twist in the story, but if you caught the foreshadowing, you would know that Song Jiang had planned this all along, and it was foreshadowed since he wrote his so-called seditious poem. Huang Cao, the rebel he mentioned in it, was the man who brought the collapse of Tang Dynasty. But throughout his rebellion, he was constantly trying to negotiate amnesty from the government, all the way to the end. When the empire is weak and faced by multiple threats, the dynasty often negotiate with the rebels. They would pardon the rebels' crimes and incorporate them into the imperial army to have them fight against the other threats. When Song Jiang wrote that his achievements will eclipse Huang Cao, he did not mean that his rebellion will succeed. He actually meant that he will successfully gain amnesty from the government. Part of the reason why he treated Marshal Su well previously was because he wanted to negotiate an amnesty directly with the government. It is also possible that he tried to make Lu Junyi the leader because the latter had better social position and the emperor may grant them amnesty more easily, since Song Jiang was just a lowly clerk in comparison. Luckily for Song Jiang, he was gifted with a silver tongue, and he managed to convince the other outlaws to go along with his plan, except for Li Kui, who remained unconvinced. Li Kui almost got himself executed for insubordination. But Li Kui being Li Kui just keep getting away with everything. This internal fiction would last until the next major story arc. In the meantime, Song Jiang uses his downtime to visit the Lantern Festival in the capital with his entourage. He's even got a doctor, An Daoquan, to burn away his penal tattoo with acid, symbolizing his turn into a reformed man. While he was there, Cai Jing saw a warning notice of the four most dangerous bandits: Song Jiang to the east, Wang Qing to the west, Tian Hu to the north, and Fang La to the south. Here is your foreshadowing of what was to come. Cai Jing cut out Song Jiang's name from the list symbolically and handed it to his leader. But this trip wasn't all about pleasure. Song Jiang used this opportunity to build relationship with the courtesan who was the emperor's secret mistress, Li Sisi. She turned out to be one of the few rare women who's portrayed positively in the novel. They developed good rapport, but the emperor's sudden visit to his mistress through the secret tunnel cut their conversation short. The bandits comically hid in the corner of the room and debated whether they should ask for amnesty now. But before they could make up their mind, Li Kui, who was waiting outside, stirred up trouble by picking a fight. And as a result, the capital was thrown into chaos and they had to send a contingent to save them. This led to a side adventure with Yanqing and Li Kui, who were separated from the main group. As it turned out, Yanqing was quite proficient in wrestling and won a Xiangpu contest, pronounced in Japanese as sumo. It is debated whether this Song Dynasty sumo is related to Japanese sumo. Maybe the Japanese just used the same kanji word to call their indigenous wrestling tradition the same name. Li Kui then met her family, who claimed that Song Jiang had kidnapped their daughter. Without verifying anything, he returned to accuse Song Jiang of kidnapping an innocent woman. But as it turned out, the kidnapping was done by an imposter. After saving the girl, Li Kui was so sorry for his mistake, he never doubted Song Jiang again. Meanwhile, in the palace, the emperor finally decided to get some business done. This is the first time he will do any work in a month, and he wanted to deal with the Liangshan bandits after the trouble in the capital. But since they had the Khitan Liao dynasty attacking their northern borders, the ministers argued that it would be a better idea to grant them amnesty and let them deal with the Khitans. However, the 4 villainous ministers and eunuchs, Cai Jing, Gao Qiu, Tong Guan, and Yang Jian, had developed grudges against the bandits, and they will do everything they can to sabotage the deal. They sent their own men to accompany the envoy and behaved very rudely to give the bandits a bad impression. But not everything was their fault, because the imperial decree itself was quite rude. The emperor demanded the bandits' total submission, or else. To make the matter worse, the gift of imperial wine was secretly drunk by one of the outlaws, and it was replaced by cheap wine. So it was really everyone's fault that the first offer failed disastrously. Now the evil ministers have the pretext to send their army against them. But this actually suited Professor Wu Yong's designs, because being ever cold and calculative, he knew that they won't be given a good deal until they wipe out a few battalions of the imperial army to show the lowlifes that they mean business. He is like the sinister Mr. Spock of the group. The eunuch general, Tong Guan, sallied forth against the bandits, and he was defeated. They captured him, treated him with courtesy, and sent him back just to rub it in. Also, because they wanted to stay on the government's good side and negotiate another treaty. Then it is Gao Qiu's turn to lead an expedition against them. The big bad, one of the main antagonists of the novel. But still, there is no way he could match the united might of the 108 outlaws. Thus, he was defeated easily twice. So he tried to get back at them by doctoring the second amnesty offer by the emperor. He changed the terms, saying that only Song Jiang is accepted from the amnesty to drive a wedge between them. But the outlaws refused the deal outright and shot the messenger. No way will they ever abandon their leader. A third battle was fought between Gao Qiu and the bandits, and this time Gao Qiu himself fell into the hands of the bandits. He was treated well too. Anticlimactically, Ling Cong and Yang Zi, who had long-standing grudge against him, only stared at him menacingly. In some adaptations, they added more drama here, because this part in the original version is kinda weak. Eventually, they released Gao Qiu so that he could negotiate an amnesty with the emperor, and he was watched over by some outlaws. But after a while, they still didn't receive any news from him. So they sent Yan Qing and Dai Zong to investigate what was happening, and also to arrange a meeting with the emperor themselves. Yan Qing used their connection with the courtesan Li Sisi to arrange a meeting with the emperor. She agreed, and since Yan Qing was quite a fine specimen of a man, she also wanted to... Not wanting to ruin their grand plan, Yan Qing used the cruelest way possible to end any possible romantic entanglement. He sibling zoned her by making her his sworn sister. This is one step worse from friend zoning, because as sworn siblings, they have to look after each other, while at the same time, it killed any possibility of any romantic relationship between them because it would be considered incest. After explaining everything to the emperor, it turned out that he was not informed of Gao Qiu's failure at all. From now on, he will investigate this affair personally. They also contacted the honest official, Marshal Su Yuanjing, to advocate for their amnesty. Finally, they retrieved their comrades who were put under house arrest by Gao Qiu before returning home. With all the dominoes in place, the bandits finally achieved their goal. The emperor berated his corrupt officials and offered a full pardon to the Liangshan bandits. Not only that they were completely exonerated by their leader, Song Jiang and Lu Junyi would be given official posts once they reported to the palace. Well, there you go. Our heroes are outlaws no more. But this doesn't mean that they have atoned for their sins and fulfilled their destiny. This is merely the beginning of their path towards atonement. No, you are not going to break us up, Song Jiang objected. The imperial court tried to reassign the former outlaws to different posts. To be fair, this is a rational course of action, since it would reduce the risk of rebellion. But that would also make them vulnerable to the schemes of the 4 evil ministers. That's why Song Jiang just can't let them do that. But the ministers had expected this reply. So they urged the emperor to have Song Jiang and his rebellious men executed for treason. As Emperor Huizong wavered, the good minister Su Yuanjing alerted the emperor of the ongoing Khitan assault on their northern provinces. Rather than fighting a civil war, wouldn't it be wise to send Song Jiang and his men to fight the Khitans instead? He advised. Yeah, let's do that. The emperor agreed. All right, the Liangshan heroes are off to war. It is lights off for the mountain headquarters because they are off to do the heaven's will, defending the country by murder and mayhem. I think it is important to mention that Song Jiang and the other stars of destiny are not cleared of their sins or bad karma yet. The amnesty just gave them the opportunity to start working towards it. Compared to the Western sensibility, which is strongly influenced by Christianity, the Chinese have a more practical view of atonement. They can only redeem themselves through work and merit. Judicially, the East and West were quite similar. Criminals are fined and punished. But spiritually, Christian Catholics emphasized more on the acts of confessing the sin and accompanied it with good work. Christian Protestants, on the other hand, emphasizes more on the faith in God for redemption, sola fide. But of course, this is a bit of a generalization. There are nuances even among the different denominations within those divisions. In Chinese tradition, redemption is usually earned through work, 将功赎罪, to repay sin by merit. To repay sin by merit is a commonly recited Chinese phrase. If you are Buddhist, then you can offset the bad karma by gaining good karma. There are repentance ritual and confessions, but their purpose is only to facilitate meritorious act. But of course, different traditions consider different things to be meritorious. In some Buddhist sects, even reciting sutra can be considered as meritorious act. As for Taoism, originally, they didn't have the idea of sin, but some religious Taoists had borrowed the Buddhist concept and developed similar beliefs. Look, the writer of Water Margin was probably not a theologist, okay? So he would probably have a more generalized idea that Song Jiang and the rest need to redeem themselves through service. But then, here comes the dilemma. During their march, one of their men discovered that a corrupt official was stealing their provisions, so they killed him in the heat of the argument. This obviously was a grave offense. Song Jiang had no choice but to execute the offender, his own men, to show responsibility to the government. This was the first time he had to harm his own people. For his loyalty to the country, he had to start sacrificing his principles of brotherhood. With the full constellation of 108 stars on his side, the Khitans were no match for Song Jiang. But Song Jiang's greatest trial would not be fought on the battlefield. It will be fought in his heart and mind. The Khitan Liao Dynasty court sent him an offer to join them. Why would heroes like Song Jiang want to serve the corrupt Song Dynasty anyway? The Khitan envoy asked. The Song Dynasty court is controlled by corrupt officials. They did not even give them real official titles. Even if they won the war, their achievements will be diminished by the corrupt officials. And if they were to protest, they would be branded as criminals all over again. The Liao Emperor, on the other hand, appreciated their talents and promised them hefty rewards and important titles. The envoy was right on the mark. Song Jiang made some excuses to pause this line of conversation and consulted with Professor Wu Yong. The cold and calculative professor had to admit that the Liao Emperor was right, and the rational course of action was to defect. No, Song Jiang just couldn't accept this. But still, he didn't know what was the right path ahead. He needed some sort of guidance, so he went to see Gongsun Seng's Taoist master who was nearby. The old sage could not tell him what to do. However, he gave Song Jiang a cryptic advice that may help him. The loyal are few, the righteous rare. Success in yin, but the moon's light is dim. When winter starts, the flock of geese will disperse. Starting from Wu, ending in Cu. official fortune is returned. Song Jiang didn't get it. This message was never fully explained, but there are a few different theories about its meaning, and we may get to that later. Anyway, not long after, the Khitan envoy received a message from Song Jiang announcing his defection. As Song Jiang entered their fortress, it turned out to be a ruse. Song Jiang attacked the Khitans and dealt them a major defeat. Song Jiang had made his mind. He is going to throw his lot with his own country, then stay loyal, like the perfect Confucian hero. The rest of the campaign was challenging, but not too tough for our heroes. When the Khitans pulled out their secret weapon, the Wuxia 5 Faces formation, the Mystic Lady of the Ninth Heaven instructed Song Jiang on how to counter it, and the Khitan invaders were soundly defeated. The Liao Emperor then begged for forgiveness and proposed a treaty to offer tribute and promise to never invade Song again. The Song Emperor was advised by his minister that, historically, it had never been their ancestors' policy to annihilate the barbarians. It would be beneficial for the Khitans to serve as a buffer state for the Song Empire. Thus, the Song Emperor exhibited his benevolence by signing the treaty. This is actually a wish fulfillment fiction, because this treaty never happened, and historically, the Song dynasty was really weak during this period. They couldn't even beat the Khitans, who were quite unorganized during this time. Conversely, the small but rising Jurchen tribe, which would eventually found the Qing dynasty, were steamrolling the Khitans in the north. With this campaign successfully completed, Song Jiang used his downtime to visit the Buddhist abbots at Mount Wutai, Lu Zhishen's original master, seeking guidance. The Buddhists believe that life is suffering. Nevertheless, the abbots gave Song Jiang another cryptic advice about his future. When the wild geese are in the wind, their shadows falter. Reunion in the east is out of reach. Take aim and all will be achieved. At Twin Forest, fortune is all attained. To Lu Zhishen, he gave a more practical but similarly cryptic advice. Meet Xia, take prisoner. Find La, make an arrest. Hear the tides and come around. See a trusted one and be silent. Before Song Jiang returned to the court to report his victory, he decided to do some side quests. He will take down the rebel leaders Tian and Wang. Marshal Su Yuanjing gave them the approval, and off they went. This 2 arc about them fighting Tian and Wang only exist in Water Margin versions that go over 100 chapters, such as the 120 chapters version which I'm basing this series on. As I've discussed in a previous video, the authorship of Water Margin is subject to vigorous debate. Classic scholars such as Qing argued that chapter 1 to 71 were written by Si Nai'an, and the rest was written by his apprentice Luo Guanzong, who eventually became the author of Romance of the Three Kingdoms. But the chapters where they fight Tian and Wang felt even more out of place. The protagonist's personality fell flat. There are no significant character developments, and any developments were nullified by the end of these chapters. They feel like very obvious filler chapters used to extend the 108 stars feel-good winning streak. If you take out these chapters and stitch the rest back together, you will get precisely 100 chapters, and you won't even notice the difference. Anyway, I will still give you the rough outline of these 2 arcs. As usual, Song Jiang would fight his enemies using formation, deception, magic, and his specialty, embedding sleeper agents. So his campaigns do get a bit repetitive after a while. But the difference about his Tianhu campaign is that Gong Sun Seng actually used his magic for offensive purposes. He summoned dragons and exploding them into clay shrapnels at his enemies. They also recruited the enemy's wizards and warrior woman, who ended up marrying Zhang Qing, the stone slinger. On the Wang Qing campaign, the campaign is actually seen from the comedic perspective of the bumbling Wang Qing, a style that is very out of place compared to the rest of the novel. By the end of this arc, the new recruits leaves, and Zhang Qing's warrior brides stayed at home and never appeared on page again. Actually, you can just ignore these filler chapters and imagine that the band had just finished visiting the abbot. On his way to report to the palace, Song Jiang saw Yanqing hunting geese. His every shot hit his prey, and somehow, when he saw the geese fall one by one, Song Jiang just couldn't help but to lecture Yanqing. When he saw the geese fall, it felt a lot like losing one of their own. After Song Jiang returned to the capital and Wang was executed, he received a dreadful news. Gong Sun Seng requested to leave to go back to his master and look after his mother. Song Jiang tried to persuade him to stay, but he just couldn't. So, with heavy heart, he bid his old friend goodbye. It is winter time. Like most classical Chinese stories, Water Margin also ends with a long downward arc of tragedy. So you better prepare your hankies, because this roller coaster is going down. On New Year's Day, dissatisfaction started to spread among the band. Not only that they hadn't been rewarded with official posts for their victory, they were barred from joining the celebration in the capital. They are being treated like dirt. They might as well rebel, they told the professor. When Song Jiang heard this, he quickly used his silver tongue to pacify his men. To keep his idle men from stirring up trouble, he proposed that they join the campaign against the rebel leader Fang. The emperor approved of Song Jiang's request and promised more rewards when they return. And by the way, the emperor requested to have the craftsman Qin Dynasty and vet Huang Fuduan transferred to the palace. Obviously, Song Jiang can't refuse it. Then there are more requests by other officials for his other band members. By the time they march against Fang, a total of 5 stars have left Song Jiang. Now, Fang is nothing like the other rebels. He was based on a historical person, but the details here are mostly fictional. In the novel, he had seen omens. Originally a woodcutter, he saw a reflection of himself dressed in emperor's clothing in the river. After he started his rebellion, remarkable individuals started to join his cause and became an alternate version of what Song Jiang could have become had he chosen to rebel instead. This fight is a mirror match. Fang La's rebels are tough. Even on their first line of defense, Runzhou City, they took the lives of 3 stars of destiny. They were unceremoniously killed by arrows and trampled by horses. After taking that city, Song Jiang had to split his army into 2 divisions, led by himself and Lu Junyi, to capture 2 strategic points at the same time. During this time, however, Yang Zi fell sick. He had to be left in a nearby town, and they would discover that he did not survive from his illness later. As they advanced, our band of brothers found their challenge to be growing exponentially harder. The enemy commander, Gao Keli, took down 2 of the stars before he was killed himself. Why? Why is this happening? Had the heavens abandoned us? When Song Jiang received report from Lu Junyi's division, he learned that 3 more stars had fallen. Song Jiang fell unconscious. For unknown reason, the mystic lady of the 9th heaven never appeared to him again in this campaign. Maybe he was abandoned after all. Look, it is too much work if I count every death that happened. You just need to know that people are dying left and right, and every loss dealt a blow to poor Song Jiang's heart. He doubted that this campaign would succeed. But the professor pulled him back together. No, Song Jiang was not about to give up yet. He is going to stay committed to take down Fang and lay out a long and elaborate trap for his enemy. The process of getting to Fang stronghold, however, was torturous, and the paths ahead were full of dangers. Luckily for him, everyone pulled together to pitch in, even beyond death. Zhang Sun, who was killed on a mission, possessed his brother Zhang Heng to complete it. Later, Lu Zhishen faced off against Fang warrior monk who was just as strong as he was, and he had to be saved by Wu Song. After the monk was defeated, Fang finally pulled out his big guns and sent out his sorcerers, Demon Lord Zheng and Bao Daoyi. The husband and wife team, Wang Ying and Hu Sanyang, became fodder to the giant spirit the Demon Lord summoned and his magical weapon. In that critical battle, Wu Song's arm was severed by Bao Daoyi's flying sword, and Lu Zhishen went missing in action as he pursued an enemy general named Xiahou into the forest. As the enemy's magical dark cloud closed in on Song Jiang, he thought that everything was over for him. Until he was miraculously saved by a local spirit. A massive downgrade from the Mystic Lady. The spirit, however, foretold that Fang La would fall within the next 10 days, which lifted Song Jiang's spirit, and he was able to continue the battle the next day, despite this massive defeat. Without Gong Sun Seng to dispel the enemy magic, Song Jiang had to rely on his 70 books and Fan Rui to counter the Demon Lord's magic. They combined their power to conjure a guardian spirit out of Guan Seng and had a spectral kaiju fight with the Demon Lord. As the Demon Lord's sentinel was pushed back, Guan Seng took the opportunity to rush in and split his faltering enemy into two. Angered by this, the second sorcerer, Bao Daoyi, rose up, and boom! He was taken out by a cannonball. His magic was no match for Song Jiang's cunning and science. After wiping out his enemy, Song Jiang approached Fang La's final base. Fang La was getting desperate, but he still had one final secret weapon on his side. His greatest general of all will annihilate Song Jiang and his goons. Ha ha ha! The tide had suddenly turned to Song Jiang's advantage, because that general was actually Cai Jing, who had gone undercover working for Fang La. When Cai Jing suddenly switched sides against Fang La at the most crucial moment, the rebel army was paralyzed and they were easily wiped out. Defiant science or not, Fang La still fell victim to Song Jiang's specialty. However, after Fang La's base was razed, they discovered that Fang La himself was nowhere to be found. That's because he had fled the city using a hidden path. When he saw that it was safe, suddenly a big fat monk pounced on him and tied him up. It was Lu Zhishen. The prophecy had come true. Pursuing Xiahou led him to arresting Fang La. Song Jiang and the stars completed the campaign gloriously, at a great cost, because now only 36 stars were left. But the attrition continued nonetheless. Lu Zhishen fulfilled the rest of his prophecy and became silent. He found enlightenment and died in his meditation. Wu Song, now crippled, donated all his rewards to the monastery and became a real monk, dying at the age of 80. Ling Cong was struck by paralysis and died 6 months later. Yanqing, on the other hand, decided to leave and go into hiding. When his master Lu Junyi asked him why, he mentioned that the faithful ministers and generals of the past were rewarded with disgrace and death for their service, and the wise thing to do is to quit while they are ahead. By the time Song Jiang reached the capital, only 27 of them remained in the band. This time, they are all given the appropriate ranks and financial rewards for their contribution. But their gains did not last long, as slanders and accidents took their lives. The 4 evil ministers obviously couldn't stand seeing their enemies happy, so they invited Lu Junyi to an imperial banquet and poisoned his wine. He died on his way home. As for Song Jiang, they delivered him a bottle of poisoned imperial wine, and he had to drink it because he could not refuse an imperial gift. As the slow-acting poison took effect, Song Jiang realized that his time had come, and he called for an old friend to come over. I think we should revisit the cryptic messages left by the Taoist sage and Buddhist abbot. These messages are not properly explained in the book, but I interpret them as warnings of his impending doom. When the Mystic Lady told them that their task is to defend the land from external and internal threats, was Fang La the internal threat, or was it really the officials? Did Song Jiang make a mistake? This novel leaves us with a lot of clues which it never clarified. Maybe Song Jiang should have taken the advice from the message and left like Yanqing. When Li Kui arrived, Song Jiang asked his faithful old friend what would he do if the emperor wanted him to die.
Obviously, start a rebellion!
Li Kui answered. So Song Jiang poured him a cup of wine and had him drink it. He then apologized to Li Kui because he could not let him destroy his legacy by starting a rebellion in his name. Even if the emperor had let him down, he could not betray the emperor and ruin his hard-earned reputation. Li Kui was shocked by this confession, but accepted his fate quietly. Well, I have served you in life, so let me serve you in death as well. He was later buried next to Song Jiang. When Wu Yong and Hua Rong heard of this news, they rushed to their graves and in their despair hung themselves to join their brothers. Not long after, the emperor had a dream, where Song Jiang and the other stars told him of the corrupt minister's treachery. When the emperor woke up, he investigated the affair. But those sly and corrupt officials got away with their excuses again. Yep, the bad guys won. If it is any consolation, I will just let you know that, historically, the Northern Song dynasty will come to an end soon. The Jurchens would later capture Emperor Huizong and his sons and humiliate them. I covered this history in a previous video. So, was Song Jiang's story a tale of heroism or a cautionary tale intended to warn people of blind loyalty and preoccupation with fame? Despite the downer ending, what makes Water Margin such a great piece of literature is that the ending really makes you think. There are so many narrative threads and breadcrumbs here. You can weave it into any message depending on your own interpretation. So what do you think is the message here, if there is any? Feel free to comment below. The fact is, even ancient scholars from China and Japan constantly debated about the contents and meaning of this novel. Not everyone liked the ending. Japanese author Kyokute Bakin, for example, disliked the whole redemption arc. So when he was inspired to write his own story, he made his character good from the beginning. That work was called Nanto Satomi Hakenden, which became a very important Japanese classic. Water Margin started a literary boom in Edo period Japan, and a lot of writers wrote their stories modeled around Water Margin. I think this is because the story of a band of outcasts, misunderstood by society, forced to extreme ends, and their quest for redemption is not a uniquely Chinese story. It is a universal human story that resonates with all who had experienced injustice in their lives. If you are inspired by this story, maybe you should write your own Water Margin. You know, I think the anti-establishment theme could already make it be easily adaptable to a cyberpunk reimagining. But maybe you've got other ideas. And I am curious to know, what would your Water Margin look like? If you are still watching this, thank you all for sticking all the way to the end. Our channel have lots of great videos on the history and culture of East Asia, so be sure to subscribe to get more. Also, remember that we've got great t-shirts and merch you can get to support the channel. Before I go, I would like to thank our patrons at Patreon and other contributors for making this series possible. Until next time, stay cool, my bros.